Welcome back to A Clock in the Journal, where timeless mysteries unfold. Today, we present The Crystal Stopper by Maurice Leblanc, a tale of political intrigue, hidden secrets, and the brilliant mind of Arsène Lupin. Let's step into the story. Chapter 5, The 27. The child was sleeping peacefully on the bed. The mother did not move from the sofa on which Lupin had laid her, but her easier breathing and the blood which was now returning to her face announced her impending recovery from her swoon. He observed that she wore a wedding ring. Seeing a locket hanging from her bodice, he stooped and, turning it, found a miniature photograph representing a man of about 40 and a lad, a stripling rather, in a schoolboy's uniform. He studied the fresh, young face set in curly hair. "It's as I thought," he said. "Ah, poor woman." The hand which he took between his grew warmer by degrees. The eyes opened, then closed again. She murmured, "Jacques, do not distress yourself. It's all right, he's asleep." She recovered consciousness entirely. But, as she did not speak, Lupin put questions to her, to make her feel a gradual need of unbosoming herself. And he said, pointing to the locket, "The schoolboy is Gilbert, isn't he?" "Yes," she said. "And Gilbert is your son?" She gave a shiver and whispered, "Yes, Gilbert is my son, my eldest son." So she was the mother of Gilbert the prisoner at the Santé, relentlessly pursued by the authorities, and now awaiting his trial for murder. Lupin continued, "And the other portrait?" "My husband." "Your husband?" "Yes, he died 3 years ago." She was now sitting up. Life quivered in her veins once more, together with the horror of living, and the horror of all the ghastly things that threatened her. Lupin went on to ask, "What was your husband's name?" She hesitated a moment and answered, "Mergy." He exclaimed, "Victorien Mergy, the deputy?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Lupin remembered the incident and the stir which it had caused. 3 years ago, Mergy the deputy had blown out his brains in the lobby of the chamber without leaving a word of explanation behind him, and no one had ever discovered the slightest reason for that suicide. "Do you know the reason?" asked Lupin, completing his thought aloud. "Yes, I know it." "Gilbert, perhaps?" "No." "Gilbert had disappeared for some years, turned out of doors and cursed by my husband. It was a very great sorrow, but there was another motive." "What was that?" asked Lupin. But it was not necessary for Lupin to put further questions. Madame Mergy could keep silent no longer, and, slowly at first, with all the anguish of that past which had to be called up, she told her story. 25 years ago, when my name was Clarisse Darcel, and my parents living, I knew 3 young men at Nice. Their names will at once give you an insight into the present tragedy. They were Alexis Daubrec, Victorien Mergy, and Louis Praville. The 3 were old acquaintances, had gone to college in the same year, and served in the same regiment. Praville at that time was in love with a singer at the opera house at Nice. The 2 others, Mergy and Daubrec, were in love with me. I shall be brief as regards all this, and, for the rest, as regards the whole story, for the facts tell their own tale. I fell in love with Victorien Mergy from the first. Perhaps I was wrong not to declare myself at once. But true love is always timid, hesitating, and shy, and I did not announce my choice until I felt quite certain and quite free. Unfortunately, that period of waiting, so delightful for those who cherish a secret passion, had permitted Daubrec to hope. His anger was something horrible. Clarisse Mergy stopped for a few seconds and resumed in a stifled voice. "I shall never forget it. The 3 of us were in the drawing-room. Oh, I can hear even now the terrible words of threat and hatred which he uttered. Victorien was absolutely astounded. He had never seen his friend like this, with that repugnant face, that bestial expression. Yes, the expression of a wild beast. Daubrec ground his teeth. He stamped his feet. His bloodshot eyes, he did not wear spectacles in those days, rolled in their sockets, and he kept on saying, "I shall be revenged. I shall be revenged. Oh, you don't know what I am capable of. I shall wait 10 years, 20 years if necessary, but it will come like a thunderbolt. Ah, you don't know. To be revenged, to do harm, for harm's sake. What joy! I was born to do harm, and you will both beseech my mercy on your knees. On your knees. Yes, on your knees." At that moment, my father entered the room, and with his assistants and the footmen's, Victorien Mergy flung the loathsome creature out of doors. 6 weeks later, I married Victorien. "And Daubrec?" asked Lupin, interrupting her. "Did he not try?" "No, but on our wedding day, Louis Praville, who acted as my husband's best man in defiance of Daubrec's opposition, went home to find the girl he loved, the opera singer, dead, strangled." "What?" said Lupin, with a start. "Had Daubrec—" It was known that Daubrec had been persecuting her with his attentions for some days, but nothing more was known. It was impossible to discover who had gone in or out during Praville's absence. There was not a trace found of any kind. Nothing, absolutely nothing. But Praville, there was no doubt of the truth in Praville's mind or ours. Daubrec had tried to run away with the girl, perhaps tried to force her, to hustle her, and, in the course of the struggle, maddened, losing his head, caught her by the throat and killed her, perhaps without knowing what he was doing. But there was no evidence of all this, and Daubrec was not even molested. And what became of him next? For some years we heard nothing of him. We knew only that he had lost all his money gambling and that he was traveling in America. And, in spite of myself, I forgot his anger and his threats, and was only too ready to believe that he had ceased to love me and no longer harbored his schemes of revenge. Besides, I was so happy that I did not care to think of anything but my happiness, my love, my husband's political career, the health of my son Antoine. Antoine? Yes, Antoine is Gilbert's real name. The unhappy boy has at least succeeded in concealing his identity. Lupin asked, with some hesitation. At what period did Gilbert begin? I can't tell you exactly. Gilbert. I prefer to call him that and not to pronounce his real name. Gilbert, as a child, was what he is today. Lovable, liked by everybody, charming, but lazy and unruly. When he was 15, we put him to a boarding school in one of the suburbs, with the deliberate object of not having him too much at home. After 2 years' time, he was expelled from school and sent back to us. Why? Because of his conduct. The masters had discovered that he used to slip out at night, and also that he would disappear for weeks at a time, while pretending to be at home with us. What used he to do? Amuse himself backing horses, spending his time in cafes and public dancing rooms. Then he had money? Yes. Who gave it him? His evil genius, the man who, secretly, unknown to his parents, enticed him away from school, the man who led him astray, who corrupted him, who took him from us, who taught him to lie, to waste his substance and to steal. Daubrec? Daubrec. Clarisse Mergy put her hands together to hide the blushes on her forehead. She continued in her tired voice. Daubrec had taken his revenge. On the day after my husband turned our unhappy child out of the house, Daubrec sent us a most cynical letter in which he revealed the odious part which he had played and the machinations by which he had succeeded in depraving our son. And he went on to say, the reformatory, one of these days. Later on, the assize court. And then, let us hope and trust, the scaffold. Lupin exclaimed, What? Did Daubrec plot the present business? No, no. That is only an accident. The hateful prophecy was just a wish which he expressed. But oh, how it terrified me. I was ailing at the time. My other son, my little Jacques, had just been born. And every day we heard of some fresh misdeed of Gilbert's, forgeries, swindles, so much so that we spread the news in our immediate surroundings of his departure for abroad, followed by his death. Life was a misery, and it became still more so when the political storm burst in which my husband was to meet his death. What do you mean? A word will be enough. My husband's name was on the list of the 27. Ah! The veil was suddenly lifted from Lupin's eyes, and he saw, as in a flash of lightning, a whole legion of things which, until then, had been hidden in the darkness. Clarisse Mergy continued, in a firmer voice. Yes, his name was on it, but by mistake, by a piece of incredible ill luck, of which he was the victim. It is true that Victorien Mergy was a member of the committee appointed to consider the question of the Two Seas Canal. It is true that he voted with the members who were in favor of the company's scheme. He was even paid. Yes, I tell you so plainly, and I will mention the sum. He was paid 15,000 francs. But he was paid on behalf of another, of one of his political friends, a man in whom he had absolute confidence, and of whom he was the blind, unconscious tool. He thought he was showing his friend a kindness, and it proved his own undoing. It was not until the day after the suicide of the chairman of the company and the disappearance of the secretary, the day on which the affair of the canal was published in the papers, with its whole series of swindles and abominations, that my husband knew that a number of his fellow members had been bribed, and learnt that the mysterious list, of which people suddenly began to speak, mentioned his name with theirs, and with the names of other deputies, leaders of parties and influential politicians. Oh, what awful days those were! Would the list be published? Would his name come out? The torture of it! You remember the mad excitement in the chamber, the atmosphere of terror and denunciation that prevailed. Who owned the list? Nobody could say. It was known to be in existence, and that was all. 2 names were sacrificed to public odium. 2 men were swept away by the storm, and it remained unknown where the denunciation came from, and in whose hands the incriminating documents were. Daubrec, suggested Lupin. No, no, cried Madame Mergy. Daubrec was nothing at that time. He had not yet appeared upon the scene. No, don't you remember? The truth came out suddenly through the very man who was keeping it back. Germineau, the ex-minister of justice, a cousin of the chairman of the canal company. As he lay dying of consumption, he wrote from his sickbed to the prefect of police, bequeathing him that list of names, which, he said, would be found, after his death, in an iron chest in the corner of his room. The house was surrounded by police, and the prefect took up his quarters by the sick man's bedside. Germineau died. The chest was opened and found to be empty. Daubrec, this time, Lupin declared. Yes, Daubrec, said Madame Mergy, whose excitement was momentarily increasing. Alexis Daubrec, who, for 6 months, disguised beyond recognition, had acted as Germineau's secretary. It does not matter how he discovered that Germineau was the possessor of the paper in question. The fact remains that he broke open the chest on the night before the death. So much was proved at the inquiry, and Daubrec's identity was established. But he was not arrested? What would have been the use? They knew well enough that he must have deposited the list in a place of safety. His arrest would have involved a scandal, the reopening of the whole case. So they made terms. Lupin laughed. That's funny, making terms with Daubrec. Yes, very funny, said Madame Mergy bitterly. During this time he acted, and without delay, shamelessly, making straight for the goal. A week after the theft, he went to the Chamber of Deputies, asked for my husband, and bluntly demanded 30,000 francs of him to be paid within 24 hours. If not, he threatened him with exposure and disgrace. My husband knew the man he was dealing with, knew him to be implacable and filled with relentless hatred. He lost his head and shot himself. How absurd, Lupin could not help saying. How absurd! Daubrec possesses a list of 27 names. To give up any one of those names he is obliged, if he would have his accusation believed, to publish the list itself, that is to say, to part with the document, or at least a photograph of it. Well, in so doing he creates a scandal, it is true, but he deprives himself at the same time of all further means of levying blackmail. Yes and no, she said. How do you know? Through Dobreck himself. The villain came to see me and cynically told me of his interview with my husband and the words that had passed between them. Well, there is more than that list, more than that famous bit of paper on which the secretary put down the names and the amounts paid, and to which, you will remember, the chairman of the company, before dying, affixed his signature in letters of blood. There is more than that. There are certain less positive proofs which the people interested do not know of. The correspondence between the chairman and the secretary, between the chairman and his counsel, and so on. Of course, the list scribbled on the bit of paper is the only evidence that counts. It is the one incontestable proof which it would be no good copying or even photographing, for its genuineness can be tested most absolutely. But, all the same, the other proofs are dangerous. They have already been enough to do away with 2 deputies. And Dobreck is marvelously clever at turning this fact to account. He selects his victim, frightens him out of his senses, points out to him the inevitable scandal, and the victim pays the required sum, or else he kills himself, as my husband did. Do you understand now? Yes, said Lupin. And, in the silence that followed, he drew a mental picture of Dobreck's life. He saw him the owner of that list, using his power, gradually emerging from the shadow, lavishly squandering the money which he extorted from his victims, securing his election as a district councillor and deputy, holding sway by dint of threats and terror, unpunished, invulnerable, unattackable, feared by the government, which would rather submit to his orders than declare war upon him, respected by the judicial authorities. So powerful, in a word, that Praville had been appointed Secretary-General of Police over the heads of all who had prior claims. And you saw him again? He asked. I saw him again. I had to. My husband was dead, but his honor remained untouched. Nobody suspected the truth. In order at least to defend the name which he left me, I accepted my first interview with Dobreck. Your first, yes, for there have been others. Many others, she said in a strained voice. Yes, many others, at the theater, or in the evening at Angers, or else in Paris at night. For I was ashamed to meet that man, and I did not want people to know it. But it was necessary. A duty more imperative than any other commanded it. The duty of avenging my husband. She bent over Lupin, and eagerly, Yes, revenge has been the motive of my conduct and the sole preoccupation of my life. To avenge my husband, to avenge my ruined son, to avenge myself for all the harm that he has done me. I had no other dream, no other object in life. That is what I wanted, to see that man crushed, reduced to poverty, to tears, as though he still knew how to cry, sobbing in the throes of despair. You wanted his death, said Lupin, remembering the scene between them in Dobreck's study. No, not his death. I have often thought of it. I have even raised my arm to strike him. But what would have been the good? He must have taken his precautions. The paper would remain. And then there is no revenge in killing a man. My hatred went further than that. It demanded his ruin, his downfall, and to achieve that, there was but one way, to cut his claws. Dobreck, deprived of the document that gives him his immense power, ceases to exist. It means immediate bankruptcy and disaster, under the most wretched conditions. That is what I have sought. But Dobreck must have been aware of your intentions? Certainly. And, I assure you, those were strange meetings of ours. I, watching him closely, trying to guess his secret behind his actions and his words, and he, said Lupin, finishing Clarisse's thought, lying in wait for the prey which he desires, for the woman whom he has never ceased to love, whom he loves, and whom he covets with all his might and with all his furious passion. She lowered her head and said simply, Yes. A strange duel, indeed, was that which brought face to face those two beings separated by so many implacable things. How unbridled must Dobreck's passion be for him to risk that perpetual threat of death and to introduce to the privacy of his house this woman whose life he had shattered. But also how absolutely safe he must feel himself. "And your search ended? How?" asked Lupin. "My search," she replied, "long remained without fruit. You know the methods of investigation which you have followed, and which the police have followed on their side. Well, I myself employed them, years before either of you did, and in vain. I was beginning to despair. Then, one day, when I had gone to see Daubrec in his villa at Enghien, I picked up, under his writing table, a letter which he had begun to write, crumpled up and thrown into the wastepaper basket. It consisted of a few lines in bad English, and I was able to read this: 'Empty the crystal within, so as to leave a void which it is impossible to suspect.' Perhaps I should not have attached to this sentence all the importance which it deserved, if Daubrec, who was out in the garden, had not come running in and begun to turn out the wastepaper basket, with an eagerness which was very significant. He gave me a suspicious look. There was a letter there, he said. I pretended not to understand. He did not insist, but his agitation did not escape me, and I continued my quest in this direction. A month later I discovered, among the ashes in the drawing-room fireplace, the torn half of an English invoice. I gathered that a Stourbridge glass-blower, of the name of John Howard, had supplied Daubrec with a crystal bottle made after a model. The word crystal struck me at once. I went to Stourbridge, got round the foreman of the glassworks, and learnt that the stopper of this bottle had been hollowed out inside, in accordance with the instruction in the order, so as to leave a cavity, the existence of which would escape observation. Lupin nodded his head. The thing tallies beyond a doubt. Nevertheless, it did not seem to me that, even under the gilt layer, and then the hiding place would be very tiny. Tiny, but large enough, she said. On my return from England, I went to the police office to see Praville, whose friendship for me had remained unchanged. I did not hesitate to tell him first the reasons which had driven my husband to suicide, and secondly, the object of revenge which I was pursuing. When I informed him of my discoveries, he jumped for joy, and I felt that his hatred for Daubrec was as strong as ever. I learnt from him that the list was written on a slip of exceedingly thin foreign post paper, which, when rolled up into a sort of pellet, would easily fit into an exceedingly limited space. Neither he nor I had the least hesitation. We knew the hiding place. We agreed to act independently of each other, while continuing to correspond in secret. I put him in touch with Clémence, the portress in the Square Lamartine, who was entirely devoted to me. "But less so to Praville," said Lupin, "for I can prove that she betrays him. Now perhaps, but not at the start, and the police searches were numerous. It was at that time, 10 months ago, that Gilbert came into my life again. A mother never loses her love for her son, whatever he may do, whatever he may have done. And then Gilbert has such a way with him. Well, you know him. He cried, kissed my little Jacques, his brother, and I forgave him." She stopped, and, weary-voiced, with her eyes fixed on the floor, continued, "Would to heaven that I had not forgiven him! Ah, if that hour could but return, how readily I should find the horrible courage to turn him away! My poor child, it was I who ruined him, and pensively, I should have had that or any sort of courage, if he had been as I pictured him to myself, and as he himself told me that he had long been, bearing the marks of vice and dissipation, coarse, deteriorated. But, though he was utterly changed in appearance, so much so that I could hardly recognize him, there was, from the point of view of, how shall I put it, from the moral point of view, an undoubted improvement. You had helped him, lifted him, and though his mode of life was hateful to me, nevertheless he retained a certain self-respect, a sort of underlying decency that showed itself on the surface once more. He was gay, careless, happy, and he used to talk of you with such affection." She picked her words, betraying her embarrassment, not daring, in Lupin's presence, to condemn the line of life which Gilbert had selected. and yet unable to speak in favor of it. "What happened next?" asked Lupin. "I saw him very often. He would come to me by stealth, or else I went to him and we would go for walks in the country. In this way I was gradually induced to tell him our story, of his father's suicide, and the object which I was pursuing. He at once took fire. He too wanted to avenge his father, and, by stealing the crystal stopper, to avenge himself on Daubrec for the harm which he had done him. His first idea, from which, I am bound to tell you, he never swerved, was to arrange with you." "Well then," cried Lupin, "he ought to have quote. "Yes, I know, and I was of the same opinion. Unfortunately, my poor Gilbert, you know how weak he is, was under the influence of one of his comrades." "Vaucheray?" "Yes, Vaucheray, a saturnine spirit, full of bitterness and envy, an ambitious, unscrupulous, gloomy, crafty man, who had acquired a great empire over my son. Gilbert made the mistake of confiding in him and asking his advice. That was the origin of all the mischief. Vaucheray convinced him, and convinced me as well, that it would be better if we acted by ourselves. He studied the business, took the lead, and finally organized the Enghien expedition, and, under your direction, the burglary at the Villa Marie-Thérèse, which Praville and his detectives had been unable to search thoroughly, because of the active watch maintained by Léonard the valet. It was a mad scheme. We ought either to have trusted in your experience entirely, or else to have left you out altogether, taking the risk of fatal mistakes and dangerous hesitations. But we could not help ourselves. Vaucheray ruled us. I agreed to meet Daubrec at the theater. During this time, the thing took place. When I came home, at 12 o'clock at night, I heard the terrible result. Léonard murdered, my son arrested. I at once received an intuition of the future. Daubrec's appalling prophecy was being realized. It meant trial and sentence. And this through my fault, through the fault of me, the mother, who had driven my son toward the abyss from which nothing could extricate him now. Clarisse wrung her hands and shivered from head to foot. What suffering can compare with that of a mother trembling for the head of her son? Stirred with pity, Lupin said, "We shall save him. Of that there is not the shadow of a doubt. But it is necessary that I should know all the details. Finish your story, please. How did you know, on the same night, what had happened at Enghien?" She mastered herself, and, with a face wrung with fevered anguish, replied, "Through two of your accomplices, or rather two accomplices of Vaucheray, to whom they were wholly devoted, and who had chosen them to row the boats. The two men outside, the Growler and the Masher?" "Yes." "On your return from the villa, when you landed after being pursued on the lake by the commissary of police, you said a few words to them, by way of explanation, as you went to your car. Mad with fright, they rushed to my place, where they had been before, and told me the hideous news. Gilbert was in prison. Oh, what an awful night! What was I to do? Look for you? Certainly, and implore your assistance. But where was I to find you? It was then that the two whom you call the Growler and the Masher, driven into a corner by circumstances, decided to tell me of the part played by Vaucheray, his ambitions, his plan, which had long been ripening." "To get rid of me, I suppose?" said Lupin with a grin. "Yes." As Gilbert possessed your complete confidence, Vaucheray watched him and, in this way, got to know all the places which you live at. A few days more, and, owning the crystal stopper, holding the list of the 27, inheriting all Daubrec's power, he would have delivered you to the police, without compromising a single member of your gang, which he looked upon as thenceforth his. "The ass!" muttered Lupin. "A muddler like that!" And he added, "So the panels of the doors were cut out by his instructions, in anticipation of the contest on which he was embarking against you and against Daubrec, at whose house he did the same thing. He had under his orders a sort of acrobat, an extraordinarily thin dwarf, who was able to wriggle through those apertures, and who thus detected all your correspondence and all your secrets. That is what his two friends revealed to me. I at once conceived the idea of saving my elder son by making use of his brother, my little Jacques, who is himself so slight and so intelligent, so plucky as you have seen. We set out that night. Acting on the information of my companions, I went to Gilbert's rooms and found the keys of your flat in the Rue Matignon, where it appeared that you were to sleep. Unfortunately, I'd changed my mind on the way, and thought much less of asking for your help than of recovering the crystal stopper, which, if it had been discovered at Enghien, must obviously be at your flat. I was right in my calculations. In a few minutes, my little Jacques, who had slipped into your bedroom, brought it to me. I went away quivering with hope, mistress in my turn of the talisman, keeping it to myself without telling Praville I had absolute power over Dobreck. I could make him do all that I wanted. He would become the slave of my will, and, instructed by me, would take every step in Gilbert's favor and obtain that he should be given the means of escape, or else that he should not be sentenced. It meant my boy's safety. Well, Clarisse rose from her seat with a passionate movement of her whole being, leant over Lupin, and said in a hollow voice, "There was nothing in that piece of crystal. Nothing. Do you understand? No paper, no hiding place. The whole expedition to Enghien was futile. The murder of Léonard was useless. The arrest of my son was useless. All my efforts were useless. But why? 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 Because what you stole from Dobreck was not the stopper made by his instructions, but the stopper which was sent to John Howard, the Stourbridge glassworker, to serve as a model. If Lupin had not been in the presence of so deep a grief, he could not have refrained from one of those satirical outbursts with which the mischievous tricks of fate are wont to inspire him. As it was, he muttered between his teeth, "How stupid!" and still more stupid as Dobreck had been given the warning. "No," she said. "I went to Enghien on the same day. In all that business Dobreck saw and sees nothing but an ordinary burglary, an annexation of his treasures. The fact that you took part in it put him off the scent. Still, the disappearance of the stopper. To begin with, the thing can have had but a secondary importance for him, as it is only the model. How do you know? There is a scratch at the bottom of the stem, and I have made inquiries in England since." "Very well, but why did the key of the cupboard from which it was stolen never leave the manservant's possession? And why, in the second place, was it found afterward in the drawer of a table in Dobreck's house in Paris? Of course, Dobreck takes care of it, and clings to it in the way in which one clings to the model of any valuable thing. And that is why I replaced the stopper in the cupboard before its absence was noticed. And that also is why, on the second occasion, I made my little Jacques take the stopper from your overcoat pocket and told the portress to put it back in the drawer. Then he suspects nothing?" "Nothing. He knows that the list is being looked for, but he does not know that Praville and I are aware of the thing in which he hides it." Lupin had risen from his seat and was walking up and down the room, thinking. Then he stood still beside Clarisse and asked, "When all is said, since the Enghien incident, you have not advanced a single step?" "Not one. I have acted from day to day, led by those two men, or leading them, without any definite plan, or at least," he said, "without any other plan than that of getting the list of the 27 from Dobreck." "Yes, but how? Besides, your tactics made things more difficult for me. It did not take us long to recognize your old servant Victoire in Dobreck's new cook, and to discover, from what the portress told us, that Victoire was putting you up in her room, and I was afraid of your schemes. It was you, was it not, who wrote to me to retire from the contest? Yes. You also asked me not to go to the theater on the vaudeville night? Yes. The portress caught Victoire listening to Dobreck's conversation with me on the telephone, and the masher who was watching the house saw you go out. I suspected, therefore, that you would follow Dobreck that evening. And the woman who came here late one afternoon was myself. I felt disheartened and wanted to see you." "And you intercepted Gilbert's letter?" "Yes, I recognized his writing on the envelope." "But your little Jacques was not with you." No, he was outside in a motor car with the masher, who lifted him up to me through the drawing-room window, and he slipped into your bedroom through the opening in the panel. What was in the letter? As ill luck would have it, reproaches. Gilbert accused you of forsaking him, of taking over the business on your own account. In short, it confirmed me in my distrust, and I ran away. Lupin shrugged his shoulders with irritation. What a shocking waste of time! And what a fatality that we were not able to come to an understanding earlier. You and I have been playing at hide-and-seek, laying absurd traps for each other, while the days were passing, precious days beyond repair. You see, she said, shivering, you too are afraid of the future. No, I am not afraid, cried Lupin. But I am thinking of all the useful work that we could have done by this time, if we had united our efforts. I am thinking of all the mistakes and all the acts of imprudence which we should have been saved if we had been working together. I am thinking that your attempt tonight to search the clothes which Daubrec was wearing was as vain as the others, and that at this moment, thanks to our foolish duel, thanks to the din which we raised in his house, Daubrec is warned and will be more on his guard than ever. Clarisse Mergy shook her head. No, I don't think that. The noise will not have roused him, for we postponed the attempt for 24 hours so that the portress might put a narcotic in his wine. And she added slowly, and then, you see, nothing can make Daubrec be more on his guard than he is already. His life is nothing but one mass of precautions against danger. He leaves nothing to chance. Besides, has he not all the trumps in his hand? Lupin went up to her and asked, What do you mean to convey? According to you, is there nothing to hope for on that side? Is there not a single means of attaining our end? Yes, she murmured, there is one only. He noticed her pallor before she had time to hide her face between her hands again. And again a feverish shiver shook her frame. He seemed to understand the reason of her dismay, and, bending toward her, touched by her grief, Please, he said, please answer me openly and frankly. It's for Gilbert's sake, is it not? Though the police, fortunately, have not been able to solve the riddle of his past, though the real name of Vaucheray's accomplice has not leaked out, there is one man, at least, who knows it. Isn't that so? Daubrec has recognized your son Antoine through the alias of Gilbert, has he not? Yes, and he promises to save him, doesn't he? He offers you his freedom, his release, his escape, his life. That was what he offered you, was it not, on the night in his study, when you tried to stab him? Yes, that was it. And he makes one condition, does he not? An abominable condition, such as would suggest itself to a wretch like that? I am right, am I not? Clarisse did not reply. She seemed exhausted by her protracted struggle with a man who was gaining ground daily and against whom it was impossible for her to fight. Lupin saw in her the prey conquered in advance, delivered to the victor's whim. Clarisse Mergy, the loving wife of that Mergy whom Daubrec had really murdered, the terrified mother of that Gilbert whom Daubrec had led astray, Clarisse Mergy, to save her son from the scaffold, must, come what may, and however ignominious the position, yield to Daubrec's wishes. She would be the mistress, the wife, the obedient slave of Daubrec, of that monster with the appearance and the ways of a wild beast, that unspeakable person of whom Lupin could not think without revulsion and disgust. Sitting down beside her gently, with gestures of pity, he made her lift her head and, with his eyes on hers, said, Listen to me. I swear that I will save your son. I swear it. Your son shall not die. Do you understand? There is not a power on earth that can allow your son's head to be touched as long as I am alive. I believe you. I trust your word. Do. It is the word of a man who does not know defeat. I shall succeed. Only I entreat you to make me an irrevocable promise. What is that? You must not see Daubrec again. I swear it. You must put from your mind any idea, any fear, however obscure, of an understanding between yourself and him, of any sort of bargain. I swear it. She looked at him with an expression of absolute security and reliance, and he, under her gaze, felt the joy of devotion and an ardent longing to restore that woman's happiness, or, at least, to give her the peace and oblivion that heal the worst wounds. "Come," he said, in a cheerful tone, rising from his chair. "All will yet be well. We have 2 months, 3 months before us. It is more than I need, on condition, of course, that I am unhampered in my movements, and for that you will have to withdraw from the contest, you know." "How do you mean?" "Yes, you must disappear for a time. Go and live in the country. Have you no pity for your little Jacques?" This sort of thing would end by shattering the poor little man's nerves. "And he has certainly earned his rest, haven't you, Hercules?" The next day Clarisse Mergy, who was nearly breaking down under the strain of events and who herself needed repose, lest she should fall seriously ill, went, with her son, to board with a friend who had a house on the skirt of the forest of Saint-Germain. She felt very weak, her brain was haunted by visions, and her nerves were upset by troubles which the least excitement aggravated. She lived there for some days in a state of physical and mental inertia, thinking of nothing and forbidden to see the papers. One afternoon, while Lupin, changing his tactics, was working out a scheme for kidnapping and confining Daubrecq, while the Growler and the Masher, whom he had promised to forgive if he succeeded, were watching the enemy's movements. While the newspapers were announcing the forthcoming trial for murder of Arsène Lupin's 2 accomplices, one afternoon, at 4 o'clock, the telephone bell rang suddenly in the flat in the Rue Chateaubriand. Lupin took down the receiver. "Hello?" A woman's voice, a breathless voice, said, "Monsieur Michel Beaumont?" "You are speaking to him, madame. To whom have I the honor?" "Quick, monsieur. Come at once. Madame Mergy has taken poison." Lupin did not wait to hear details. He rushed out, sprang into his motor car, and drove to Saint-Germain. Clarisse's friend was waiting for him at the door of the bedroom. "Dead?" he asked. "No," she replied. "She did not take sufficient. The doctor has just gone. He says she will get over it. And why did she make the attempt? Her son Jacques has disappeared." "Carried off?" "Yes, he was playing just inside the forest. A motor car was seen pulling up. Then there were screams. Clarisse tried to run, but her strength failed, and she fell to the ground, moaning. 'It's he! It's that man! All is lost!' She looked like a madwoman. Suddenly she put a little bottle to her lips and swallowed the contents." "What happened next?" "My husband and I carried her to her room. She was in great pain." "How did you know my address, my name?" "From herself, while the doctor was attending to her. Then I telephoned to you." "Has anyone else been told?" "No, nobody. I know that Clarisse has had terrible things to bear, and that she prefers not to be talked about." "Can I see her?" "She is asleep just now, and the doctor has forbidden all excitement." "Is the doctor anxious about her?" "He is afraid of a fit of fever, any nervous strain, an attack of some kind which might cause her to make a fresh attempt on her life." "And that would be what is needed to avoid it? A week or a fortnight of absolute quiet, which is impossible as long as her little Jacques." Lupin interrupted her. "You think that, if she got her son back, oh, certainly there would be nothing more to fear." "You're sure? You're sure?" "Yes, of course you are." "Well, when Madame Mergy wakes, tell her from me that I will bring her back her son this evening, before midnight. This evening, before midnight. It's a solemn promise." With these words, Lupin hurried out of the house, and stepping into his car, shouted to the driver, "Go to Paris, Square Lamartine. Daubrecq the deputies." Chapter 6. The Death Sentence. Lupin's motor car was not only an office, a writing room furnished with books, stationery, pens, and ink, but also a regular actor's dressing room, containing a complete makeup box, a trunk filled with every variety of wearing apparel, another crammed with properties, umbrellas, walking sticks, scarves, eyeglasses, and so on. In short, a complete set of paraphernalia which enabled him to alter his appearance from top to toe in the course of a drive. The man who rang at Dobreck the deputy's gate at 6 o'clock that evening was a stout, elderly gentleman in a black frock coat, a bowler hat, spectacles, and whiskers. The portress took him to the front door of the house and rang a bell. Victoire appeared. Lupin asked, "Can Monsieur Dobreck see Dr. Verne?" "Monsieur Dobreck is in his bedroom, and it is rather late." "Give him my card, please." He wrote the words, "From Madame Mergy," in the margin, and added, "There, he is sure to see me. But—" Victoire began. "Oh, drop your buts, old dear, do as I say, and don't make such a fuss about it." She was utterly taken aback and stammered, "You? Is it you? No, it's Louis XIV!" Quote. And pushing her into a corner of the hall, "Listen, the moment I'm done with him, go up to your room, put your things together anyhow, and clear out." "What?" "Do as I tell you. You'll find my car waiting down the avenue. Come, stir your stumps. Announce me. I'll wait in the study. But it's dark in there. Turn on the light." She switched on the electric light and left Lupin alone. "It's here," he reflected as he took a seat. "It's here that the crystal stopper lives. Unless Dobreck always keeps it by him. But no, when people have a good hiding place, they make use of it. And this is a capital one, for none of us, so far." Concentrating all his attention, he examined the objects in the room, and he remembered the note which Dobreck wrote to Praville. "Within reach of your hand, my dear Praville." You touched it. A little more and the trick was done. Nothing seemed to have moved since that day. The same things were lying about on the desk. Books, account books, a bottle of ink, a stamp box, pipes, tobacco, things that had been searched and probed over and over again. "The bounder," thought Lupin. "He's organized his business jolly cleverly. It's all dovetailed like a well-made play." In his heart of hearts, though he knew exactly what he had come to do and how he meant to act, Lupin was thoroughly aware of the danger and uncertainty attending his visit to so powerful an adversary. It was quite within the bounds of possibility that Dobreck, armed as he was, would remain master of the field, and that the conversation would take an absolutely different turn from that which Lupin anticipated. And this prospect angered him somewhat. He drew himself up as he heard a sound of footsteps approaching. Dobreck entered. He entered without a word, made a sign to Lupin, who had risen from his chair, to resume his seat, and himself sat down at the writing desk. Glancing at the card which he held in his hand, "Dr. Verne." "Yes, Monsieur le Député, Dr. Verne, of Saint-Germain." "And I see that you come from Madame Mergy. A patient of yours?" "A recent patient. I did not know her until I was called in to see her the other day, in particularly tragic circumstances." "Is she ill?" "Madame Mergy has taken poison." "What?" Dobreck gave a start, and he continued, without concealing his distress. "What's that you say? Poison? Is she dead?" "No, the dose was not large enough. If no complications ensue, I consider that Madame Mergy's life is saved." Dobreck said nothing and sat silent, with his head turned to Lupin. Is he looking at me? Are his eyes open or shut? Lupin asked himself. It worried Lupin terribly not to see his adversary's eyes, those eyes hidden by the double obstacle of spectacles and black glasses. Weak, bloodshot eyes, Madame Mergy had told him. How could he follow the secret train of the man's thought without seeing the expression of his face? It was almost like fighting an enemy who wielded an invisible sword. Presently Dobreck spoke. "So, Madame, Mergy's life is saved, and she has sent you to me. I don't quite understand. I hardly know the lady." Now for the ticklish moment, thought Lupin. Have at him, and in a genial, good-natured, and rather shy tone he said, No, Monsieur le Député, there are cases in which a doctor's duty becomes very complex, very puzzling, and you may think that in taking this step. However, to cut a long story short, while I was attending Madame Mergy, she made a second attempt to poison herself. Yes, the bottle, unfortunately, had been left within her reach. I snatched it from her. We had a struggle, and railing in her fever, she said to me in broken words, "He's the man. He's the man. Daubrec the deputy. Make him give me back my son. Tell him to, or else I would rather die." Yes, now, tonight, I would rather die. That's what she said, Monsieur le Député. So I thought that I ought to let you know. It is quite certain that in the lady's highly nervous state of mind, of course, I don't know the exact meaning of her words. I asked no questions of anybody, obeyed a spontaneous impulse, and came straight to you. Daubrec reflected for a little while and said, "It amounts to this, doctor, that you have come to ask me if I know the whereabouts of this child whom I presume to have disappeared. Is that it?" "Yes. And, if I did happen to know, you would take him back to his mother?" There was a longer pause. Lupin asked himself, "Can he by chance have swallowed the story? Is the threat of that death enough? Oh, nonsense, it's out of the question." And yet, he seems to be hesitating. "Will you excuse me?" asked Daubrec, drawing the telephone on his writing desk toward him. "I have an urgent message." "Certainly, Monsieur le Député." Daubrec called out, "Hello? 822. 19, please. 822. 19. Having repeated the number, he sat without moving. Lupin smiled. "The headquarters of police, isn't it? The Secretary General's office." "Yes, doctor. How do you know?" "Oh, as a divisional surgeon, I sometimes have to ring them up." And within himself, Lupin asked, "What the devil does all this mean? The Secretary General is Praville. Then what?" Daubrec put both receivers to his ears and said, "Are you 822? 19? I want to speak to Monsieur Praville, the Secretary General." "Do you say he's not there?" Yes, he is. He's always in his office at this time." "Tell him it's Monsieur Daubrec." "Monsieur Daubrec, the deputy. A most important communication." "Perhaps I'm in the way," Lupin suggested. "Not at all, doctor. Not at all," said Daubrec. "Besides, what I have to say has a certain bearing on your errand." And into the telephone, "Hello, Monsieur Praville? Ah, it's you, Praville, old cock. Why, you seem quite staggered. Yes, you're right, it's an age since you and I met. But after all, we've never been far away in thought. And I've had plenty of visits from you and your henchmen. In my absence, it's true. Hello? What? Oh, you're in a hurry? I beg your pardon. So am I, for that matter. Well, to come to the point, there's a little service I want to do you. Wait, can't you, you brute? You won't regret it. It concerns your renown. Hello? Are you listening? Well, take 6 men with you. Plain-clothes detectives, by preference. You'll find them at the night office. Jump into a taxi, 2 taxis, and come along here as fast as you can. I've got a rare quarry for you, old chap. One of the upper 10, a lord, a Marquis Napoleon himself. In a word, Arsène Lupin." Lupin sprang to his feet. He was prepared for everything but this. Yet something within him, stronger than astonishment, an impulse of his whole nature, made him say with a laugh, "Oh, well done, well done." Daubrec bowed his head by way of thanks, and muttered, "I haven't quite finished. A little patience, if you don't mind." And he continued, "Hello, Praville. No, old chap, I'm not humbugging. You'll find Lupin here, with me, in my study. Lupin, who's worrying me like the rest of you. Oh, one more or less makes no difference to me. But, all the same, this one's a bit too pushing. And I am appealing to your sense of kindness. Rid me of the fellow, do. Half a dozen of your satellites and the 2 who are pacing up and down outside my house will be enough. Oh, while you're about it, go up to the 3rd floor and rope in my cook as well. She's the famous Victoire, you know, Master Lupin's old nurse. And, look here, one more tip, to show you how I love you. Send a squad of men to the Rue Chateaubriand, at the corner of the Rue Balzac. That's where our national hero lives, under the name of Michel Beaumont. Do you twig, old cockalorum? And now to business. Hustle! When Daubrec turned his head, Lupin was standing up, with clenched fists. His burst of admiration had not survived the rest of the speech and the revelations which Daubrec had made about Victoire in the flat in the Rue Chateaubriand. The humiliation was too great, and Lupin no longer bothered to play the part of the small general practitioner. He had but one idea in his head, not to give way to the tremendous fit of rage that was urging him to rush at Daubrec like a bull. Daubrec gave the sort of little cluck which, with him, did duty for a laugh. He came waddling up, with his hands in his trouser pockets, and said incisively, "Don't you think that this is all for the best? I've cleared the ground, relieved the situation. At least we now know where we stand. Lupin versus Daubrec. And that's all about it. Besides, think of the time saved. Dr. Vernes, the divisional surgeon, would have taken 2 hours to spin his yarn. Whereas, like this, Master Lupin will be compelled to get his little story told in 30 minutes, unless he wants to get himself collared and his accomplices nabbed. What a shock! What a bolt from the blue! 30 minutes, and not a minute more. In 30 minutes from now, you'll have to clear out, scud away like a hare, and beat a disordered retreat. Ha ha ha, what fun! I say, Polonius, you really are unlucky each time you come up against Bibi Daubrec. For it was you who were hiding behind that curtain, wasn't it, my ill-starred Polonius? Lupin did not stir a muscle. The one and only solution that would have calmed his feelings, that is to say, for him to throttle his adversary then and there, was so absurd that he preferred to accept Daubrec's jibes without attempting to retort, though each of them cut him like the lash of a whip. It was the second time, in the same room and in similar circumstances, that he had to bow before that Daubrec of misfortune and maintain the most ridiculous attitude in silence. And he felt convinced in his innermost being that, if he opened his mouth, it would be to spit words of anger and insult in his victor's face. What was the good? Was it not essential that he should keep cool and do the things which the new situation called for? "Well, Monsieur Lupin, well," resumed the deputy, "you look as if your nose were out of joint. Come, console yourself, and admit that one sometimes comes across a joker who's not quite such a mug as his fellows. So you thought that, because I wear spectacles and eyeglasses, I was blind? Bless my soul, I don't say that I at once suspected Lupin behind Polonius, and Polonius behind the gentleman who came and bored me in the box at the vaudeville. No, no, but all the same it worried me. I could see that, between the police and Madame Mergy, there was a third bounder trying to get a finger in the pie, and, gradually, what with the words let fall by the portress, what with watching the movements of my cook and making inquiries about her in the proper quarter, I began to understand. Then, the other night, came the lightning flash. I heard the row in the house, in spite of my being asleep. I managed to reconstruct the incident, to follow up Madame Mergy's traces, first to the Rue Chateaubriand, and afterward to Saint-Germain. And then, what then? I put different facts together. The Enghien burglary, Gilbert's arrest, the inevitable treaty of alliance between the weeping mother and the leader of the gang, the old nurse installed as cook, all these people entering my house through the doors or through the windows. And I knew what I had to do. Master Lupin was sniffing at the secret. The scent of the 27 attracted him. I had only to wait for his visit. The hour has arrived. Good evening, Master Lupin. Daubrec paused. He had delivered his speech with the evident satisfaction of a man entitled to claim the appreciation of the most captious critics. As Lupin did not speak, he took out his watch. I say, only 23 minutes. How time flies. At this rate, we shan't have time to come to an explanation. And, stepping still closer to Lupin, I'm bound to say, I'm disappointed. I thought that Lupin was a different sort of gentleman. So, the moment he meets a more or less serious adversary, the colossus falls to pieces? Poor young man, have a glass of water, to bring you round. Lupin did not utter a word, did not betray a gesture of irritation. With absolute composure, with a precision of movement that showed his perfect self-control and the clear plan of conduct which he had adopted, he gently pushed Daubrec aside, went to the table, and in his turn, took down the receiver of the telephone. I want 565. 34, please, he said. He waited until he was through, and then, speaking in a slow voice and picking out every syllable, he said, Hello, Rue Chateaubriand? Is that you, Achille? Yes, it's the governor. Listen to me carefully, Achille. You must leave the flat. Hello. Yes, at once. The police are coming in a few minutes. No, don't lose your head. You've got time. Only, do what I tell you. Is your bag still packed? Good. And is one of the sides empty, as I told you? Good. Well, go to my bedroom and stand with your face to the chimney-piece. Press with your left hand on the little carved rosette in front of the marble slab, in the middle, and with your right hand on the top of the mantel-shelf. You'll see a sort of drawer with 2 little boxes in it. Be careful. One of them contains all our papers, the other, banknotes and jewelry. Put them both in the empty compartment of the bag. Take the bag in your hand and go as fast as you can, on foot, to the corner of the Avenue Victor Hugo and the Avenue de Montespan. You'll find the car waiting, with Victoire. I'll join you there. What? My clothes? My knickknacks? Never mind about all that. You be off. See you presently. Lupin quietly pushed away the telephone. Then, taking Daubrec by the arm, he made him sit in a chair by his side and said, And now listen to me, Daubrec. Oh ho! Grinned the deputy. Calling each other by our surnames, are we? Yes, said Lupin. I allowed you to. And, when Daubrec released his arm with a certain misgiving, he said, No, don't be afraid. We shan't come to blows. Neither of us has anything to gain by doing away with the other. A stab with a knife? What's the good? No, sir. Words, nothing but words. Words that strike home, though. Here are mine. They are plain and to the point. Answer me in the same way without reflecting. That's far better. The boy? I have him. Give him back. No. Madame. Murgy will kill herself. No, she won't. I tell you she will. And I tell you she will not. But she's tried to once. That's just the reason why she won't try again. Well then, no. Lupin, after a moment, went on. I expected that. Also, I thought on my way here that you would hardly tumble to the story of Dr. Verne's, and that I should have to use other methods. Lupin's methods. As you say. I had made up my mind to throw off the mask. You pulled it off for me. Well done, you. But that doesn't change my plans. Speak. Lupin took from a pocketbook a double sheet of foolscap paper, unfolded it, and handed it to Daubrec, saying, Here is an exact, detailed inventory with consecutive numbers of the things removed by my friends and myself from your Villa Marie-Thérèse on the Lac d'Enghien. As you see, there are 113 items. Of those 113 items, 68, which have a red cross against them, have been sold and sent to America. The remainder, numbering 45, are in my possession. Until further orders, they happen to be the pick of the bunch. I offer you them in return for the immediate surrender of the child. Daubrec could not suppress a movement of surprise. Oh, he said, you seem very much bent upon it. Infinitely, said Lupin, for I am persuaded that a longer separation from her son will mean death to Madame Mergy. And that upsets you, does it? Lothario? What? Lupin planted himself in front of the other and repeated, What? What do you mean? Nothing. Nothing. Something that crossed my mind. Clarisse Mergy is a young woman still, and a pretty woman at that. Lupin shrugged his shoulders. You brute, he mumbled. You imagine that everybody is like yourself, heartless and pitiless. It takes your breath away, what? To think that a shark like me can waste his time playing the Don Quixote? And you wonder what dirty motive I can have? Don't try to find out. It's beyond your powers of perception. Answer me instead. Do you accept? So you're serious? Asked Daubrec, who seemed but little disturbed by Lupin's contemptuous tone. Absolutely. The 45 pieces are in a shed, of which I will give you the address, and they will be handed over to you if you call there at 9 o'clock this evening with the child. There was no doubt about Daubrec's reply. To him, the kidnapping of little Jacques had represented only a means of working upon Clarisse Mergy's feelings, and perhaps also a warning for her to cease the contest upon which she had engaged. But the threat of a suicide must needs show Daubrec that he was on the wrong track. That being so, why refuse the favorable bargain which Arsène Lupin was now offering him? I accept, he said. Here's the address of my shed, 99, Rue Charles Lafitte, Neuilly. You have only to ring the bell. And suppose I send Prazoville, the Secretary-General, instead? If you send Prazoville, Lupin declared, the place is so arranged that I shall see him coming, and that I shall have time to escape, after setting fire to the trusses of hay and straw which surround and conceal your credence tables, clocks, and Gothic virgins. But your shed will be burnt down. I don't mind that. The police have their eye on it already. I am leaving it in any case. And how am I to know that this is not a trap? Begin by receiving the goods, and don't give up the child till afterward. I trust you, you see. Good, said Daubrec. You've foreseen everything. Very well. You shall have the nipper. The fair Clarisse shall live, and we will all be happy. And now, if I may give you a word of advice, it is to pack off as fast as you can. Not yet, eh? I said, not yet. But you're mad. Proville's on his way. He can wait. I've not done. Why, what more do you want? Clarisse shall have her brat. Isn't that enough for you? No. Why not? There is another son. Gilbert. Yes. Well, I want you to save Gilbert. What are you saying? I save Gilbert. You can, if you like. It only means taking a little trouble. Until that moment, Daubrec had remained quite calm. He now suddenly blazed out and, striking the table with his fist, "No," he cried, "not that. Never. Don't reckon on me. No, that would be too idiotic." He walked up and down, in a state of intense excitement, with that queer step of his, which swayed him from right to left on each of his legs, like a wild beast, a heavy, clumsy bear. And, with a hoarse voice and distorted features, he shouted, "Let her come here! Let her come and beg for her son's pardon! But let her come unarmed, not with criminal intentions, like last time. Let her come as a supplicant, as a tamed woman, as a submissive woman, who understands and accepts the situation. Gilbert? Gilbert's sentence? The scaffold? Why, that is where my strength lies. What? For more than 20 years have I awaited my hour, and when that hour strikes, when fortune brings me this unhoped-for chance, when I am at last about to know the joy of a full revenge, and such a revenge, you think that I will give it up, give up the thing which I have been pursuing for 20 years? I save Gilbert? I? For nothing? For love? I? Daubrec? No, no, you can't have studied my features." He laughed, with a fierce and hateful laugh. Visibly, he saw before him, within reach of his hand, the prey which he had been hunting down so long. And Lupin also summoned up the vision of Clarisse, as he had seen her several days before, fainting, already beaten, fatally conquered, because all the hostile powers were in league against her. He contained himself and said, "Listen to me." And, when Daubrec moved away impatiently, he took him by the 2 shoulders. With that superhuman strength which Daubrec knew, from having felt it in the box at the vaudeville, and holding him motionless in his grip, he said, "One last word." "You're wasting your breath," growled the deputy. "One last word. Listen, Dobreck. Forget Madame. Murgy. Give up all the nonsensical and imprudent acts which your pride and your passions are making you commit. Put all that on one side, and think only of your interest." "My interest," said Dobreck jestingly, "always coincides with my pride and with what you call my passions." "Up to the present, perhaps. But not now that I have taken a hand in the business. That constitutes a new factor, which you choose to ignore. You are wrong. Gilbert is my pal. Gilbert is my chum. Gilbert has to be saved from the scaffold. Use your influence to that end, and I swear to you, do you hear? I swear that we will leave you in peace. Gilbert's safety, that's all I ask. You will have no more battles to wage with Madame Mergy, with me. There will be no more traps laid for you. You will be the master, free to act as you please. Gilbert's safety, Dobreck. If you refuse, what then? If you refuse, it will be war, relentless war. In other words, a certain defeat for you, meaning thereby that I shall take the list of the 27 from you." "Rot! You think so, do you?" "I swear it. What Praville and all his men, what Clarisse Mergy, what nobody has been able to do, you think that you will do." "I shall." "And why? By favor of what saint will you succeed where everybody else has failed? There must be a reason." "There is." "What is it?" "My name is Arsène Lupin." He had let go of Dobreck, but held him for a time under the dominion of his authoritative glance and will. At last, Dobreck drew himself up, gave him a couple of sharp taps on the shoulder, and, with the same calm, the same intense obstinacy, said, "And my name's Dobreck. My whole life has been one desperate battle, one long series of catastrophes and routs, in which I spent all my energies until victory came, complete, decisive, crushing, irrevocable victory. I have against me the police, the government, France, the world. What difference do you expect it to make to me if I have Monsieur Arsène Lupin against me into the bargain? I will go further. The more numerous and skillful my enemies, the more cautiously I am obliged to play. And that is why, my dear sir, instead of having you arrested, as I might have done, yes, as I might have done and very easily, I let you remain at large and beg charitably to remind you that you must quit in less than 3 minutes. Then the answer is no. The answer is no. You won't do anything for Gilbert? Yes, I shall continue to do what I have been doing since his arrest. That is to say, to exercise indirect influence with the Minister of Justice, so that the trial may be hurried on and end in the way in which I want to see it end." "What?" cried Lupin, beside himself with indignation. "It's because of you. It's for you." "Yes, it's for me, Dobreck. Yes, by Jove. I have a trump card, the sun's head, and I am playing it. When I have procured a nice little death sentence for Gilbert, when the days go by and Gilbert's petition for a reprieve is rejected by my good offices, you shall see, Monsieur Lupin, that his mummy will drop all her objections to calling herself Madame Alexis Dobreck, and giving me an unexceptionable pledge of her good will. That fortunate issue is inevitable. Whether you like it or not, it is foredoomed. All I can do for you is to invite you to the wedding and the breakfast. Does that suit you? No? You persist in your sinister designs? Well, good luck. Lay your traps, spread your nets, rub up your weapons, and grind away at the complete foreign post paper burglar's handbook. You'll need it. And now, good night. The rules of open-handed and disinterested hospitality demand that I should turn you out of doors. Hop it!" Lupin remained silent for some time. With his eyes fixed on Dobreck, he seemed to be taking his adversary's size, gauging his weight, estimating his physical strength, discussing, in fine, in which exact part to attack him. Dobreck clenched his fists and worked out his plan of defense to meet the attack when it came. Half a minute passed. Lupin put his hand to his hip pocket. Dobreck did the same and grasped the handle of his revolver. A few seconds more. Coolly, Lupin produced a little gold box of the kind that ladies use for holding sweets, opened it, and handed it to Dobreck. "A lozenge? What's that?" asked the other in surprise. "Cough drops." "What for?" "For the draft you're going to feel." And, taking advantage of the momentary fluster into which Dobreck was thrown by his sally, he quickly took his hat and slipped away. "Of course," he said, as he crossed the hall, "I am knocked into fits." But all the same, that bit of commercial traveler's waggery was rather novel in the circumstances. To expect a pill and receive a cough drop is by way of being a sort of disappointment. It left the old chimpanzee quite flummoxed. As he closed the gate, a motor car drove up and a man sprang out briskly, followed by several others. Lupin recognized Praville. "Monsieur le secrétaire général," he muttered. "Your humble servant. I have an idea that some day fate will bring us face to face, and I am sorry for your sake, for you do not inspire me with any particular esteem, and you have a bad time before you on that day. Meanwhile, if I were not in such a hurry, I should wait till you leave, and I should follow Dobreck to find out in whose charge he has placed the child whom he is going to hand back to me. But I am in a hurry. Besides, I can't tell that Dobreck won't act by telephone. So let us not waste ourselves in vain efforts, but rather join Victoire, Achille, and our precious bag." 2 hours later, Lupin, after taking all his measures, was on the lookout in his shed at Neuilly, and saw Dobreck turn out of an adjoining street and walk along with a distrustful air. Lupin himself opened the double doors. "Your things are in here, Monsieur le Député," he said. "You can go round and look. There is a job master's yard next door. You have only to ask for a van and a few men. Where is the child?" Dobreck first inspected the articles and then took Lupin to the Avenue de Neuilly, where 2 closely veiled old ladies stood waiting with little Jacques. Lupin carried the child to his car, where Victoire was waiting for him. All this was done swiftly, without useless words, and as though the parts had been got by heart and the various movements settled in advance, like so many stage entrances and exits. At 10 o'clock in the evening, Lupin kept his promise and handed little Jacques to his mother. But the doctor had to be hurriedly called in, for the child, upset by all those happenings, showed great signs of excitement and terror. It was more than a fortnight before he was sufficiently recovered to bear the strain of the removal which Lupin considered necessary. Madame Murgy herself was only just fit to travel when the time came. The journey took place at night, with every possible precaution, and under Lupin's escort. He took the mother and son to a little seaside place in Brittany and entrusted them to Victoire's care and vigilance. "At last," he reflected when he had seen them settled, "there is no one between the Dobreck bird and me. He can do nothing more to Madame Murgy and the kid, and she no longer runs the risk of diverting the struggle through her intervention. By Jingo, we have made blunders enough. First, I have had to disclose myself to Dobreck. Secondly, I have had to surrender my share of the Enghien movables. True, I shall get those back, sooner or later. Of that there is not the least doubt. But, all the same, we are not getting on, and in a week from now, Gilbert and Vaucheray will be up for trial." What Lupin felt most in the whole business was Dobreck's revelation of the whereabouts of the flat. The police had entered his place in the Rue Chateaubriand. The identity of Lupin and Michel Beaumont had been recognized, and certain papers discovered, and Lupin, while pursuing his aim, while at the same time managing various enterprises on which he had embarked, while avoiding the searches of the police, which were becoming more zealous and persistent than ever, had to set to work and reorganize his affairs throughout, on a fresh basis. His rage with Dobreck, therefore, increased in proportion to the worry which the deputy caused him. He had but one longing, to pocket him, as he put it, to have him at his bidding by fair means or foul, to extract his secret from him. He dreamt of tortures fit to unloose the tongue of the most silent of men. The boot, the rack, red-hot pincers, nailed planks. No form of suffering, he thought, was more than the enemy deserved, and the end to be attained justified every means. "Oh," he said to himself, "oh, for a decent bench of inquisitors and a couple of bold executioners, what a time we should have!" Every afternoon the Growler and the Masher watched the road which Daubrec took between the Square Lamartine, the Chamber of Deputies, and his club. Their instructions were to choose the most deserted street and the most favorable moment, and, one evening, to hustle him into a motor car. Lupin, on his side, got ready an old building, standing in the middle of a large garden, not far from Paris, which presented all the necessary conditions of safety and isolation, and which he called the monkey's cage. Unfortunately, Daubrec must have suspected something, for every time, so to speak, he changed his route, or took the underground or a tram, and the cage remained unoccupied. Lupin devised another plan. He sent to Marseille for one of his associates, an elderly retired grocer called Brindebois, who happened to live in Daubrec's electoral district and interested himself in politics. Old Brindebois wrote to Daubrec from Marseille, announcing his visit. Daubrec gave this important constituent a hearty welcome, and a dinner was arranged for the following week. The elector suggested a little restaurant on the left bank of the Seine, where the food, he said, was something wonderful. Daubrec accepted. This was what Lupin wanted. The proprietor of the restaurant was one of his friends. The attempt, which was to take place on the following Thursday, was this time bound to succeed. Meanwhile, on the Monday of the same week, the trial of Gilbert and Vacheray opened. The reader will remember, and the case took place too recently for me to recapitulate its details, the really incomprehensible partiality which the presiding judge showed in his cross-examination of Gilbert. The thing was noticed and severely criticized at the time. Lupin recognized Daubrec's hateful influence. The attitude observed by the two prisoners differed greatly. Vacheray was gloomy, silent, hard-faced. He cynically, in curt, sneering, almost defiant phrases, admitted the crimes of which he had formerly been guilty. But, with an inconsistency which puzzled everybody except Lupin, he denied any participation in the murder of Léonard the valet, and violently accused Gilbert. His object, in thus linking his fate with Gilbert's, was to force Lupin to take identical measures for the rescue of both his accomplices. Gilbert, on the other hand, whose frank countenance and dreamy, melancholy eyes won every sympathy, was unable to protect himself against the traps laid for him by the judge, or to counteract Vaucheray's lies. He burst into tears, talked too much, or else did not talk when he should have talked. Moreover, his counsel, one of the leaders of the bar, was taken ill at the last moment. And here again Lupin saw the hand of Daubrec, and he was replaced by a junior who spoke badly, muddied the whole case, set the jury against him, and failed to wipe out the impression produced by the speeches of the Advocate General and of Vaucheray's counsel. Lupin, who had the inconceivable audacity to be present on the last day of the trial, the Thursday, had no doubt as to the result. A verdict of guilty was certain in both cases. It was certain because all the efforts of the prosecution, thus supporting Vaucheray's tactics, had tended to link the two prisoners closely together. It was certain, also and above all, because it concerned two of Lupin's accomplices. From the opening of the inquiry before the magistrate until the delivery of the verdict, all the proceedings had been directed against Lupin, and this in spite of the fact that the prosecution, for want of sufficient evidence and also in order not to scatter its efforts over too wide an area, had decided not to include Lupin in the indictment. He was the adversary aimed at, the leader who must be punished in the person of his friends, the famous and popular scoundrel whose fascination in the eyes of the crowd must be destroyed for good and all. With Gilbert and Vaucheray executed, Lupin's halo would fade away and the legend would be exploded. Lupin, Lupin, Arsène Lupin. It was the one name heard throughout the 4 days. The Advocate General, the presiding judge, the jury, the counsel, the witnesses had no other words on their lips. Every moment, Lupin was mentioned and cursed at, scoffed at, insulted, and held responsible for all the crimes committed. It was as though Gilbert and Vaucheray figured only as supernumeraries, while the real criminal undergoing trial was he, Lupin, Master Lupin, Lupin the burglar, the leader of a gang of thieves, the forger, the incendiary, the hardened offender, the ex-convict, Lupin the murderer, Lupin stained with the blood of his victim, Lupin lurking in the shade, like a coward, after sending his friends to the foot of the scaffold. "Oh, the rascals know what they're about," he muttered. "It's my debt which they are making my poor old Gilbert pay." And the terrible tragedy went on. At 7 o'clock in the evening, after a long deliberation, the jury returned to court and the foreman read out the answers to the questions put from the bench. The answer was yes to every count of the indictment. A verdict of guilty without extenuating circumstances. The prisoners were brought in. Standing up but staggering and white-faced, they received their sentence of death. And, amid the great, solemn silence, in which the anxiety of the onlookers was mingled with pity, the assize president asked, "Have you anything more to say, Vaucheray?" "Nothing, Monsieur le Président. Now that my mate is sentenced as well as myself, I am easy. We are both on the same footing. The governor must find a way to save the two of us." "The governor?" "Yes, Arsène Lupin." There was a laugh among the crowd. The president asked, "And you, Gilbert?" Tears streamed down the poor lad's cheeks, and he stammered a few inarticulate sentences. But, when the judge repeated his question, he succeeded in mastering himself and replied in a trembling voice, "I wish to say, Monsieur le Président, that I am guilty of many things. That's true. I have done a lot of harm, but, all the same, not this. No, I have not committed murder. I have never committed murder, and I don't want to die. It would be too horrible." He swayed from side to side, supported by the warders, and he was heard to cry, like a child calling for help, "Governor, save me, save me, I don't want to die." Then, in the crowd, amid the general excitement, a voice rose above the surrounding clamor. "Don't be afraid, little un! The governor's here!" A tumult and hustling followed. The municipal guards and the policemen rushed into court and laid hold of a big, red-faced man, who was stated by his neighbors to be the author of that outburst, and who struggled hand and foot. Questioned without delay, he gave his name, Philippe Bonnel, an undertaker's man, and declared that someone sitting beside him had offered him 100-franc note if he would consent, at the proper moment, to shout a few words which his neighbor scribbled on a bit of paper. How could he refuse? In proof of his statements, he produced the 100-franc note and the scrap of paper. Philippe Bonnel was let go. Meanwhile, Lupin, who of course had assisted energetically in the individual's arrest and handed him over to the guards, left the law courts, his heart heavy with anguish. His car was waiting for him on the quay. He flung himself into it, in despair, seized with so great a sorrow that he had to make an effort to restrain his tears. Gilbert's cry, his voice wrung with affliction, his distorted features, his tottering frame, all this haunted his brain, and he felt as if he would never, for a single second, forget those impressions. He drove home to the new place which he had selected among his different residences, and which occupied a corner of the Place de Clichy. He expected to find the growler and the masher, with whom he was to kidnap Daubrec that evening. But he had hardly opened the door of his flat when a cry escaped him. Clarisse stood before him, Clarisse, who had returned from Brittany at the moment of the verdict. He at once gathered from her attitude and her pallor that she knew. And at once, recovering his courage in her presence, without giving her time to speak, he exclaimed, "Yes, yes, yes, but it doesn't matter. We foresaw that. We couldn't prevent it. What we have to do is to stop the mischief. And tonight, you understand? Tonight, the thing will be done." Motionless and tragic in her sorrow, she stammered, "Tonight? Yes. I have prepared everything. In 2 hours, Daubrec will be in my hands. Tonight, whatever means I have to employ, he shall speak." "Do you mean that?" she asked faintly, while a ray of hope began to light up her face. "He shall speak. I shall have his secret. I shall tear the list of the 27 from him. And that list will set your son free." "Too late," Clarisse murmured. "Too late? Why?" "Do you think that, in exchange for such a document, I shall not obtain Gilbert's pretended escape. Why, Gilbert will be at liberty in 3 days. In 3 days. He was interrupted by a ring at the bell. Listen, here are our friends. Trust me. Remember that I keep my promises. I gave you back your little Jacques. I shall give you back Gilbert. He went to let the growler and the masher in and said, Is everything ready? Is old Brindebois at the restaurant? Quick, let us be off. It's no use, Governor, replied the masher. No use? What do you mean? There's news. What news? Speak, man. Daubrec has disappeared. Eh? What's that? Daubrec disappeared? Yes, carried off from his house in broad daylight. The devil. By whom? Nobody knows. 4 men. There were pistols fired. The police are on the spot. Praville is directing the investigations. Lupin did not move a limb. He looked at Clarisse Mergy, who lay huddled in a chair. He himself had to bow his head. Daubrec carried off meant one more chance of success lost. Chapter 7. The Profile of Napoleon. Soon as the prefect of police, the chief of the criminal investigation department, and the examining magistrates had left Daubrec's house, after a preliminary and entirely fruitless inquiry, Praville resumed his personal search. He was examining the study and the traces of the struggle which had taken place there, when the portress brought him a visiting card, with a few words in pencil scribbled upon it. "Show the lady in," he said. "The lady has someone with her," said the portress. "Oh? Well, show the other person in as well." Clarisse Mergy entered at once and introduced the gentleman with her. A gentleman in a black frock coat, which was too tight for him, and which looked as though it had not been brushed for ages. He was shy in his manner, and seemed greatly embarrassed how to dispose of his old, rusty top hat, his gingham umbrella, his one and only glove, and his body generally. "Monsieur Nicole," said Clarisse, "a private teacher who is acting as tutor to my little Jacques. Monsieur Nicole has been of the greatest help to me with his advice during the past year. He worked out the whole story of the crystal stopper. I should like him, as well as myself, if you see no objection to telling me, to know the details of this kidnapping business, which alarms me and upsets my plans. Yours too, I expect." Praville had every confidence in Clarisse Mergy. He knew her relentless hatred of Daubrec and appreciated the assistance which she had rendered in the case. He therefore made no difficulties about telling her what he knew, thanks to certain clues, and especially to the evidence of the portress. For that matter, the thing was exceedingly simple. Daubrec, who had attended the trial of Gilbert and Vaucheray as a witness and who was seen in court during the speeches, returned home at 6 o'clock. The portress affirmed that he came in alone and that there was nobody in the house at the time. Nevertheless, a few minutes later she heard shouts, followed by the sound of a struggle and 2 pistol shots, and from her lodge she saw 4 masked men scuttle down the front steps, carrying Daubrec the deputy, and hurry toward the gate. They opened the gate. At the same moment, a motor car arrived outside the house. The 4 men bundled themselves into it, and the motor car, which had hardly had time to stop, set off at full speed. "Were there not always 2 policemen on duty?" asked Clarisse. "They were there," said Praville, "but at 150 yards distance, and Daubrec was carried off so quickly that they were unable to interfere, although they hastened up as fast as they could." "And did they discover nothing, find nothing?" "Nothing, or hardly anything. Merely this." "What is that?" "A little piece of ivory, which they picked up on the ground." There was a 5th party in the car, and the portress saw him get down while the others were hoisting Daubrec in. As he was stepping back into the car, he dropped something and picked it up again at once. But the thing, whatever it was, must have been broken on the pavement, for this is the bit of ivory which my men found. "But how did the 4 men manage to enter the house?" asked Clarisse. "By means of false keys, evidently, while the portress was doing her shopping in the course of the afternoon, and they had no difficulty in secreting themselves, as Daubrec keeps no other servants." I have every reason to believe that they hid in the room next door, which is the dining room, and afterward attacked Daubrecq here, in the study. The disturbance of the furniture and other articles proves how violent the struggle was. We found a large-bore revolver belonging to Daubrecq on the carpet. One of the bullets had smashed the glass over the mantelpiece, as you see. Clarisse turned to her companion for him to express an opinion. But Monsieur Nicole, with his eyes obstinately lowered, had not budged from his chair and sat fumbling at the rim of his hat, as though he had not yet found a proper place for it. Prasville gave a smile. It was evident that he did not look upon Clarisse's adviser as a man of first-rate intelligence. "The case is somewhat puzzling, monsieur," he said. "Is it not?" Yes, M. Nicole confessed. "Most puzzling." "Then you have no little theory of your own upon the matter?" "Well, monsieur le secrétaire général, I'm thinking that Daubrecq has many enemies." "Ah, capital! And that several of those enemies who are interested in his disappearance must have banded themselves against him." "Capital! Capital!" said Prasville with satirical approval. "Capital! Everything is becoming clear as daylight. It only remains for you to furnish us with a little suggestion that will enable us to turn our search in the right direction. Don't you think, monsieur le secrétaire général, that this broken bit of ivory which was picked up on the ground— No, Monsieur Nicole, no. That bit of ivory belongs to something which we do not know, and which its owner will at once make it his business to conceal. In order to trace the owner, we should at least be able to define the nature of the thing itself." M. Nicole reflected and then began. "Monsieur le secrétaire général, when Napoleon I fell from power— Oh, Monsieur Nicole! Oh, a lesson in French history! Only a sentence, Monsieur le secrétaire général, just one sentence which I will ask your leave to complete. When Napoleon I fell from power, the Restoration placed a certain number of officers on half-pay. These officers were suspected by the authorities and kept under observation by the police. They remained faithful to the emperor's memory, and they contrived to reproduce the features of their idol on all sorts of objects of everyday use— snuff-boxes, rings, breastpins, penknives, and so on. Well, this bit comes from a walking stick, or rather a sort of loaded cane or life-preserver, the knob of which is formed of a piece of carved ivory. When you look at the knob in a certain way, you end by seeing that the outline represents the profile of the little corporal. What you have in your hand, monsieur le secrétaire général, is a bit of the ivory knob at the top of a half-pay officer's life-preserver." "Yes," said Prasville, examining the exhibit. "Yes, I can make out a profile, but I don't see the inference." "The inference is very simple. Among Daubrecq's victims, among those whose names are inscribed on the famous list, is the descendant of a Corsican family in Napoleon's service, which derived its wealth and title from the emperor, and was afterward ruined under the Restoration. It is 10 to 1 that this descendant, who was the leader of the Bonapartist party a few years ago, was the 5th person hiding in the motor car. Need I state his name?" "The Marquis d'Albufex?" said Prasville. "The Marquis d'Albufex," said Monsieur Nicole. Monsieur Nicole, who no longer seemed in the least worried with his hat, his glove, and his umbrella, rose and said to Prasville, "Monsieur le secrétaire général, I might have kept my discovery to myself and not told you of it until after the final victory, that is, after bringing you the list of the 27. But matters are urgent. Daubrecq's disappearance, contrary to what his kidnappers expect, may hasten on the catastrophe which you wish to avert. We must therefore act with all speed. Monsieur le secrétaire général, I ask for your immediate and practical assistance." "In what way can I help you?" asked Prasville, who was beginning to be impressed by his quaint visitor. "By giving me tomorrow those particulars about the Marquis d'Albufex which it would take me personally several days to collect." Prasville seemed to hesitate and turned his head toward Madame Mergy. Clarisse said, "I beg of you to accept Madame Nicole's services. He is an invaluable and devoted ally. I will answer for him as I would for myself." "What particulars do you require, monsieur?" asked Prasville. "Everything that concerns the Marquis d'Albufex, the position of his family, the way in which he spends his time, his family connections, the properties which he owns in Paris and in the country. Praville objected. After all, whether it's the Marquis or another, Daubrecq's kidnapper is working on our behalf, seeing that, by capturing the list, he disarms Daubrecq. And who says, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, that he is not working on his own behalf? That is not possible, as his name is on the list. And suppose he erases it? Suppose you then find yourself dealing with a second blackmailer, even more grasping and more powerful than the first, and one who, as a political adversary, is in a better position than Daubrecq to maintain the contest. The Secretary-General was struck by the argument. After a moment's thought, he said, "Come and see me in my office at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I will give you the particulars. What is your address in case I should want you?" M. Nicole, 25, Place des Clichy. I am staying at a friend's flat, which he has lent me during his absence. The interview was at an end. M. Nicole thanked the Secretary-General with a very low bow and walked out, accompanied by Madame Mergy. "That's an excellent piece of work," he said outside, rubbing his hands. "I can march into the police office whenever I like and set the whole lot to work." Madame Mergy, who was less hopefully inclined, said, "Alas, will you be in time? What terrifies me is the thought that the list may be destroyed." "Goodness gracious me, by whom? By Daubrecq?" "No, but by the Marquis, when he gets hold of it. He hasn't got it yet. Daubrecq will resist long enough, at any rate, for us to reach him. Just think, Praville is at my orders. Suppose he discovers who you are. The least inquiry will prove that there is no such person as Monsieur Nicole, but it will not prove that Monsieur Nicole is the same person as Arsène Lupin. Besides, make yourself easy. Praville is not only beneath contempt as a detective, he has but one aim in life, which is to destroy his old enemy, Daubrecq. To achieve that aim, all means are equally good, and he will not waste time in verifying the identity of a Monsieur Nicole who promises him Daubrecq. Not to mention that I was brought by you, and that, when all is said, my little gifts did dazzle him to some extent. So let us go ahead boldly." Clarisse always recovered confidence in Lupin's presence. The future seemed less appalling to her, and she forced herself to admit, that the chances of saving Gilbert were not lessened by that hideous death sentence. But he could not prevail upon her to return to Brittany. She wanted to fight by his side. She wanted to be there and share all his hopes and all his disappointments. The next day, the inquiries of the police confirmed what Praville and Lupin already knew. The Marquis d'Albufex had been very deeply involved in the business of the canal, so deeply that Prince Napoleon was obliged to remove him from the management of his political campaign in France, and he kept up his very extravagant style of living only by dint of constant loans and makeshifts. On the other hand, insofar as concerned the kidnapping of Daubrecq, it was ascertained that, contrary to his usual custom, the Marquis had not appeared in his club between 6 and 7 that evening, and had not dined at home. He did not come back until midnight, and then he came on foot. M. Nicole's accusation, therefore, was receiving an early proof. Unfortunately, and Lupin was no more successful in his own attempts, it was impossible to obtain the least clue as to the motor car, the chauffeur, and the 4 people who had entered Daubrecq's house. Were they associates of the Marquis, compromised in the canal affair like himself? Were they men in his pay? Nobody knew. The whole search, consequently, had to be concentrated upon the Marquis and the country seats and houses which he might possess at a certain distance from Paris, a distance which, allowing for the average speed of a motor car and the inevitable stoppages, could be put at 60 to 90 miles. Now d'Albufex, having sold everything that he ever had, possessed neither country houses nor landed estates. They turned their attention to the Marquis, relations, and intimate friends. Was he able on this side to dispose of some safe retreat in which to imprison Daubrecq? The result was equally fruitless. And the days passed. And what days for Clarisse Mergy! Each of them brought Gilbert nearer to the terrible day of reckoning. Each of them meant 24 hours less from the date which Clarisse had instinctively fixed in her mind. and she said to Lupin, who was racked with the same anxiety, 55 days more. 50 days more. What can one do in so few days? Oh, I beg of you. I beg of you. What could they do indeed? Lupin, who would not leave the task of watching the Marquis to anyone but himself, practically lived without sleeping. But the Marquis had resumed his regular life, and doubtless suspecting something, did not risk going away. Once alone he went down to the Duc de Montmore's in the daytime. The Duke kept a pack of boarhounds, with which he hunted the forest of Durlaine. D'Albufex maintained no relations with him outside the hunt. It is hardly likely, said Proville, that the Duc de Montmore, an exceedingly wealthy man, who is interested only in his estates and his hunting and takes no part in politics, should lend himself to the illegal detention of Daubrec the deputy in his chateau. Lupin agreed, but as he did not wish to leave anything to chance, the next week, seeing d'Albufex go out one morning in riding dress, he followed him to the Gare du Nord and took the same train. He got out at Aumale, where d'Albufex found a carriage at the station which took him to the Château de Montmaur. Lupin lunched quietly, hired a bicycle, and came in view of the house at the moment when the guests were going into the park, in motor cars or mounted. The Marquis d'Albufex was one of the horsemen. Thrice in the course of the day, Lupin saw him cantering along, and he found him in the evening at the station, where d'Albufex rode up, followed by a huntsman. The proof, therefore, was conclusive, and there was nothing suspicious on that side. Why did Lupin, nevertheless, resolve not to be satisfied with appearances? And why next day did he send the Masher to find out things in the neighborhood of Montmartre? It was an additional precaution, based upon no logical reason, but agreeing with his methodical and careful manner of acting. 2 days later he received from the Masher, among other information of less importance, a list of the house party at Montmartre and of all the servants and keepers. One name struck him among those of the huntsmen. He at once wired, "Inquire about Huntsman Sebastiani." The Masher's answer was received the next day. Sebastiani, a Corsican, was recommended to the Duc de Montmartre by the Marquis d'Albufex. He lives at 2 or 3 miles from the house, in a hunting lodge built among the ruins of the feudal stronghold which was the cradle of the Montmartre family. "That's it," said Lupin to Clarisse Mergy, showing her the Masher's letter. "That name, Sebastiani, at once reminded me that d'Albufex is of Corsican descent. There was a connection. Then what do you intend to do? If Daubrec is imprisoned in those ruins, I intend to enter into communication with him. He will distrust you. No. Lately, acting on the information of the police, I ended by discovering the 2 old ladies who carried off your little Jacques at Saint-Germain, and who brought him, the same evening, to Neuilly. They are 2 old maids, cousins of Daubrec, who makes them a small monthly allowance. I have been to call on those Demoiselles Rousselot. Remember the name and the address, 134 bis, Rue du Bac. I inspired them with confidence, promised them to find their cousin and benefactor, and the elder sister, Euphrasie Rousselot, gave me a letter in which she begs Daubrec to trust Monsieur Nicole entirely. So you see, I have taken every precaution. I shall leave tonight." "We, you mean?" said Clarisse. "You? Can I go on living like this, in feverish inaction?" And she whispered, "I am no longer counting the days, the 38 or 40 days that remain to us. I am counting the hours." Lupin felt that her resolution was too strong for him to try to combat it. They both started at 5 o'clock in the morning by motor car. The Growler went with them. So as not to arouse suspicion, Lupin chose a large town as his headquarters. At Amiens, where he installed Clarisse, he was only 18 miles from Montmartre. At 8 o'clock he met the Masher not far from the old fortress, which was known in the neighborhood by the name of Mortepierre, and he examined the locality under his guidance. On the confines of the forest, the little river Ligier, which has dug itself a deep valley at this spot, forms a loop which is overhung by the enormous cliff of Mortepierre. "Nothing to be done on this side," said Lupin. "The cliff is steep, over 200 feet high, and the river hugs it all round." Not far away they found a bridge that led to the foot of a path which wound through the oaks and pines up to a little esplanade, where stood a massive iron-bound gate, studded with nails and flanked on either side by a large tower. "Is this where Sebastiani the huntsman lives?" asked Lupin. "Yes," said the masher, "with his wife, in a lodge standing in the midst of the ruins. I also learnt that he has 3 tall sons, and that all the 4 were supposed to be away for a holiday on the day when D'Aubrec was carried off." "Oh ho!" said Lupin. "The coincidence is worth remembering. It seems likely enough that the business was done by those chaps and their father." Toward the end of the afternoon, Lupin availed himself of a breach to the right of the towers to scale the curtain. From there he was able to see the huntsman's lodge and the few remains of the old fortress. Here, a bit of wall, suggesting the mantle of a chimney. Further away, a water tank. On this side, the arches of a chapel. On the other, a heap of fallen stones. A patrol path edged the cliff in front, and, at one of the ends of this patrol path, there were the remains of a formidable donjon keep raised almost level with the ground. Lupin returned to Clarisse Mergy in the evening, and from that time he went backward and forward between Amiens and Mortepierre, leaving the growler and the masher permanently on the watch. And 6 days passed. Sebastiani's habits seemed to be subject solely to the duties of his post. He used to go up to the Château de Montmartre, walk about in the forest, note the tracks of the game, and go his rounds at night. But, on the 7th day, learning that there was to be a meet, and that a carriage had been sent to Aumale station in the morning, Lupin took up his post in a cluster of box and laurels which surrounded the little esplanade in front of the gate. At 2 o'clock he heard the pack give tongue. They approached, accompanied by hunting cries, and then drew farther away. He heard them again, about the middle of the afternoon, not quite so distinctly, and that was all. But suddenly, amid the silence, the sound of galloping horses reached his ears, and, a few minutes later, he saw 2 riders climbing the river path. He recognized the Marquis d'Albufex and Sebastiani. On reaching the esplanade, they both alighted, and a woman, the huntsman's wife no doubt, opened the gate. Sebastiani fastened the horses, bridles to rings fixed on a post at a few yards from Lupin, and ran to join the Marquis. The gate closed behind them. Lupin did not hesitate, and though it was still broad daylight, relying upon the solitude of the place, he hoisted himself to the hollow of the breach. Passing his head through cautiously, he saw the 2 men and Sebastiani's wife hurrying toward the ruins of the keep. The huntsman drew aside a hanging screen of ivy and revealed the entrance to a stairway, which he went down, as did d'Albufex, leaving his wife on guard on the terrace. There was no question of going in after them, and Lupin returned to his hiding place. He did not wait long before the gate opened again. The Marquis d'Albufex seemed in a great rage. He was striking the leg of his boot with his whip, and mumbling angry words which Lupin was able to distinguish when the distance became less great. "Ah, the hound! I'll make him speak. I'll come back tonight. Tonight at 10 o'clock. Do you hear, Sebastiani? And we shall do what's necessary. Oh, the brute!" Sebastiani unfastened the horses. D'Albufex turned to the woman. "See that your sons keep a good watch. If anyone attempts to deliver him, so much the worse for him. The trapdoor is there. Can I rely upon them?" "As thoroughly as on myself, Monsieur le Marquis," declared the huntsman. "They know what Monsieur le Marquis has done for me, and what he means to do for them. They will shrink at nothing." "Let us mount and get back to the hounds," said d'Albufex. So things were going as Lupin had supposed. During these runs, d'Albufex, taking a line of his own, would push off to Mortepierre, without anybody suspecting his trick. Sebastiani, who was devoted to him body and soul, for reasons connected with the past into which it was not worthwhile to inquire, accompanied him, and together they went to see the captive, who was closely watched by the huntsman's wife and his 3 sons. "That's where we stand," said Lupin to Clarisse Mergy when he joined her at a neighboring inn. "This evening the Marquis will put Daubrecq to the question, a little brutally, but indispensably, as I intended to do myself." "And Daubrecq will give up his secret," said Clarisse, already quite upset. "I'm afraid so." "Then—" "I am hesitating between two plans," said Lupin, who seemed very calm. "Either to prevent the interview?" "How?" "By forestalling d'Albufex. At 9 o'clock, the Growler, the Masher, and I climb the ramparts, burst into the fortress, attack the keep, disarm the garrison, and the thing's done. Daubrecq is ours. Unless Sebastiani's sons fling him through the trap door to which the Marquis alluded." "For that reason," said Lupin, "I intend to risk that violent measure only as a last resort, and in case my other plan should not be practicable." "What is the other plan?" "To witness the interview. If Daubrecq does not speak, it will give us the time to prepare to carry him off under more favorable conditions. If he speaks, if they compel him to reveal the place where the list of the 27 is hidden, I shall know the truth at the same time as d'Albufex, and I swear to God that I shall turn it to account before he does." "Yes, yes," said Clarisse. "But how do you propose to be present?" "I don't know yet," Lupin confessed. "It depends on certain particulars which the Masher is to bring me, and on some which I shall find out for myself." He left the inn and did not return until an hour later, as night was falling. The Masher joined him. "Have you the little book?" asked Lupin. "Yes, Governor. It was what I saw at the Aumale newspaper shop. I got it for 10 sous. Give it me." The Masher handed him an old, soiled, torn pamphlet, entitled on the cover, "A Visit to Mortepierre, 1824, with plans and illustrations." Lupin at once looked for the plan of the donjon keep. "That's it," he said. "Above the ground were 3 stories which have been raised, and below the ground, dug out of the rock, 2 stories, one of which was blocked up by the rubbish, while the other— that's where our friend Daubrecq lies. The name is significant. The torture chamber. Poor, dear friend. Between the staircase and the torture chamber, 2 doors. Between those 2 doors, a recess in which the 3 brothers obviously sit, gun in hand. So it is impossible for you to get in that way without being seen. Impossible, unless I come from above by the story that has fallen in, and look for a means of entrance through the ceiling. But that is very risky." He continued to turn the pages of the book. Clarisse asked, "Is there no window to the room?" "Yes," he said. "From below, from the river. I have just been there. You can see a little opening, which is also marked on the plan. But it is 50 yards up, sheer, and even then the rock overhangs the water, so that again is out of the question." He glanced through a few pages of the book. The title of one chapter struck him, "The Lovers' Towers." He read the opening lines. In the old days, the donjon was known to the people of the neighborhood as the Lovers' Tower, in memory of a fatal tragedy that marked it in the Middle Ages. The Comte de Mortepierre, having received proofs of his wife's faithlessness, imprisoned her in the torture chamber, where she spent 20 years. One night her lover, the Sire de Tancarville, with reckless courage, set up a ladder in the river, and then clambered up the face of the cliff till he came to the window of the room. After filing greater than the bars, he succeeded in releasing the woman he loved and bringing her down with him by means of a rope. They both reached the top of the ladder, which was watched by his friends, when a shot was fired from the patrol path and hit the man in the shoulder. The 2 lovers were hurled into space. There was a pause after he had read this, a long pause during which each of them drew a mental picture of the tragic escape. So 3 or 4 centuries earlier, a man, risking his life, had attempted that surprising feat, and would have succeeded but for the vigilance of some sentry who heard the noise. A man had ventured, a man had dared, a man done it. Lupin raised his eyes to Clarisse. She was looking at him with such a desperate, such a beseeching look. The look of a mother who demanded the impossible, and who would have sacrificed anything to save her son. "Masher," he said, Get a strong rope, but very slender, so that I can roll it round my waist, and very long, 50 or 60 yards. You, Growler, go and look for 3 or 4 ladders and fasten them end to end." "Why, what are you thinking of, Governor?" cried the 2 accomplices. "What, you mean to— but it's madness." "Madness, why? What another has done I can do." "But it's 100 chances to 1 that you break your neck." "Well, you see, Masher, there's 1 chance that I don't." "But, Governor—" "That's enough, my friends. Meet me in an hour on the riverbank." The preparations took long in the making. It was difficult to find the material for a 50-foot ladder that would reach the first ledge of the cliff, and it required an endless effort and care to join the different sections. At last, a little after 9 o'clock, it was set up in the middle of the river and held in position by a boat, the bows of which were wedged between 2 of the rungs, while the stern was rammed into the bank. The road through the river valley was little used, and nobody came to interrupt the work. The night was dark, the sky heavy with moveless clouds. Lupin gave the Masher and the Growler their final instructions and said with a laugh, "I can't tell you how amused I am at the thought of seeing Daubrecq's face when they proceed to take his scalp or slice his skin into ribbons. Upon my word, it's worth the journey." Clarisse also had taken a seat in the boat. He said to her, "Until we meet again, and, above all, don't stir. Whatever happens, not a movement, not a cry." "Can anything happen?" she asked. "Why, remember the Sire de Tancarville." It was at the very moment when he was achieving his object, with his true love in his arms, that an accident betrayed him. But be easy. I shall be all right." She made no reply. She seized his hand and grasped it warmly between her own. He put his foot on the ladder and made sure that it did not sway too much. Then he went up. He soon reached the top rung. This was where the dangerous ascent began, a difficult ascent at the start because of the excessive steepness, and developing, midway, into an absolute escalade. Fortunately, here and there were little hollows, in which his feet found a resting place, and projecting stones, to which his hands clung. But twice those stones gave way and he slipped, and twice he firmly believed that all was lost. Finding a deeper hollow, he took a rest. He was worn out, felt quite ready to throw up the enterprise, asked himself if it was really worthwhile for him to expose himself to such danger. "I say," he thought, "seems to me you're showing the white feather, Lupin, old boy. Throw up the enterprise? Then Daubrecq will babble his secret, the Marquis will possess himself of the list, Lupin will return empty-handed, and Gilbert, the long rope which he had fastened round his waist, caused him needless inconvenience and fatigue." He fixed one of the ends to the strap of his trousers, and let the rope uncoil all the way down the ascent, so that he could use it on returning as a handrail. Then he once more clutched at the rough surface of the cliff and continued the climb, with bruised nails and bleeding fingers. At every moment he expected the inevitable fall. And what discouraged him most was to hear the murmur of voices rising from the boat, murmur so distinct that it seemed as though he were not increasing the distance between his companions and himself. And he remembered the Sire de Tancarville, alone he too amid the darkness, who must have shivered at the noise of the stones which he loosened and sent bounding down the cliff. How the least sound reverberated through the silence! If one of Daubrecq's guards was peering into the gloom from the Lovers' Tower, it meant a shot and death. And he climbed. He climbed. He had climbed so long that he ended by imagining that the goal was passed. Beyond a doubt, he had slanted unawares to the right or left, and he would finish at the patrol path. What a stupid upshot! And what other upshot could there be to an attempt which the swift force of events had not allowed him to study and prepare? Madly, he redoubled his efforts, raised himself by a number of yards, slipped, recovered the lost ground, clutched a bunch of roots that came loose in his hand, slipped once more and was abandoning the game in despair when, suddenly, stiffening himself and contracting his whole frame, his muscles and his will, he stopped still. A sound of voices seemed to issue from the very rock which he was grasping. He listened. It came from the right. Turning his head, he thought that he saw a ray of light penetrating the darkness of space. By what effort of energy, by what imperceptible movements he succeeded in dragging himself to the spot he was never able exactly to realize. But suddenly he found himself on the ledge of a fairly wide opening at least 3 yards deep, which dug into the wall of the cliff like a passage, while its other end, much narrower, was closed by 3 bars. Lupin crawled along. His head reached the bars, and he saw. Chapter 8. The Lover's Tower. The torture chamber showed beneath him. It was a large, irregular room, divided into unequal portions by the 4 wide, massive pillars that supported its arched roof. A smell of damp and mildew came from its walls and from its flags moistened by the water that trickled from without. Its appearance at any time must have been gruesome, but at that moment, with the tall figures of Sebastiani and his sons, with the slanting gleams of light that fell between the pillars, with the vision of the captive chained down upon the truckle bed, it assumed a sinister and barbarous aspect. Daubrecq was in the front part of the room, 4 or 5 yards down from the window at which Lupin lurked. In addition to the ancient chains that had been used to fasten him to his bed, and to fasten the bed to an iron hook in the wall, his wrists and ankles were girt with leather thongs, and an ingenious arrangement caused his least movement to set in motion a bell hung to the nearest pillar. A lamp placed on a stool lit him full in the face. The Marquis d'Albufex was standing beside him. Lupin could see his pale features, his grizzled mustache, his long, lean form as he looked at his prisoner with an expression of content and of gratified hatred. A few minutes passed in profound silence. Then the Marquis gave an order. "Light those 3 candles, Sebastiani, so that I can see him better." And, when the 3 candles were lit, and he had taken a long look at Daubrecq, he stooped over him and said, almost gently, "I can't say what will be the end of you and me, but at any rate, I shall have had some deuced happy moments in this room. You have done me so much harm, Daubrecq. The tears you have made me shed, yes, real tears, real sobs of despair, the money you have robbed me of, a fortune, and my terror at the thought that you might give me away. You had but to utter my name to complete my ruin and bring about my disgrace. Oh, you villain!" Daubrecq did not budge. He had been deprived of his black glasses, but still kept his spectacles, which reflected the light from the candles. He had lost a good deal of flesh, and the bones stood out above his sunken cheeks. "Come along," said d'Albufex. "The time has come to act. It seems that there are rogues prowling about the neighborhood. Heaven forbid that they are here on your account and try to release you, for that would mean your immediate death, as you know. Is the trapdoor still in working order, Sebastiani?" Sebastiani came nearer, knelt on one knee and lifted and turned a ring, at the foot of the bed, which Lupin had not noticed. One of the flagstones moved on a pivot, disclosing a black hole. "You see," the Marquis continued, "everything is provided for, and I have all that I want at hand, including dungeons. Bottomless dungeons, says the legend of the castle. So there is nothing to hope for, no help of any kind. Will you speak?" Daubrecq did not reply, and he went on. "This is the 4th time that I am questioning you, Daubrecq. It is the 4th time that I have troubled to ask you for the document which you possess, in order that I may escape your blackmailing proceedings. It is the 4th time and the last. Will you speak?" The same silence as before. D'Albufex made a sign to Sebastiani. The huntsman stepped forward, followed by 2 of his sons. One of them held a stick in his hand. "Go ahead," said d'Albufex after waiting a few seconds. Sebastiani slackened the thongs that bound Dobrec's wrists and inserted and fixed the stick between the thongs. "Shall I turn, Monsieur le Marquis?" A further silence. The Marquis waited. Seeing that Dobrec did not flinch, he whispered, "Can't you speak? Why expose yourself to physical suffering?" No reply. "Turn away, Sebastiani." Sebastiani made the stick turn a complete circle. The thongs stretched and tightened. Dobrec gave a groan. "You won't speak? Still, you know that I won't give way, that I can't give way, that I hold you, and that, if necessary, I shall torture you till you die of it. You won't speak? You won't?" "Sebastiani, once more." The huntsman obeyed. Dobrec gave a violent start of pain and fell back on his bed with a rattle in his throat. "You fool!" cried the Marquis, shaking with rage. "Why don't you speak?" "What? Haven't you had enough of that list? Surely it's somebody else's turn. Come, speak. Where is it? One word only, and we will leave you in peace. And tomorrow, when I have the list, you shall be free. Free, do you understand? But, in heaven's name, speak! Oh, the brute! Sebastiani, one more turn." Sebastiani made a fresh effort. The bones cracked. "Help! Help!" cried Dobrec in a hoarse voice, vainly struggling to release himself. And, in a spluttering whisper, "Mercy, mercy!" It was a dreadful sight. The faces of the three sons were horror-struck. Lupin shuddered, sick at heart, and realized that he himself could never have accomplished that abominable thing. He listened for the words that were bound to come. He must learn the truth. Dobrec's secret was about to be expressed in syllables, in words wrung from him by pain, and Lupin began to think of his retreat, of the car which was waiting for him, of the wild rush to Paris, of the victory at hand. "Speak," whispered d'Albufex, "speak, and it will be over." "Yes, yes," gasped Dobrec. "Well?" "Later. Tomorrow." "Oh, you're mad. What are you talking about? Tomorrow? Sebastiani, another turn." "No, no," yelled Dobrec. "Stop. Speak." "Well, then—" "The paper. I have hidden the paper." But his pain was too great. He raised his head with a last effort, uttered incoherent words, succeeded in twice saying, "Marie, Marie," and fell back, exhausted and lifeless. "Let go at once," said d'Albufex to Sebastiani. "Hang it all, can we have overdone it?" But a rapid examination showed him that Dobrec had only fainted. Thereupon he himself, worn out with the excitement, dropped on the foot of the bed, and wiping the beads of perspiration from his forehead, stammered, "Oh, what a dirty business!" "Perhaps that's enough for today," said the huntsman, whose rough face betrayed a certain emotion. "We might try again tomorrow, or the next day." The Marquis was silent. One of the sons handed him a flask of brandy. He poured out half a glass and drank it down at a draught. "Tomorrow?" he said. "No, here and now, one little effort more. At the stage which he has reached, it won't be difficult." And, taking the huntsman aside, "Did you hear what he said? What did he mean by that word, Marie? He repeated it twice." "Yes, twice," said the huntsman. "Perhaps he entrusted the document to a person called Marie." "Not he," protested d'Albufex. "He never entrusts anything to anybody. It means something different." "But what, Monsieur le Marquis?" "We'll soon find out, I'll answer for it." At that moment, Dobrec drew a long breath and stirred on his couch. D'Albufex, who had now recovered all his composure, and who did not take his eyes off the enemy, went up to him and said, "You see, Dobrec, it's madness to resist. Once you're beaten, there's nothing for it but to submit to your conqueror. Instead of allowing yourself to be tortured like an idiot, come, be sensible." He turned to Sebastiani. "Tighten the rope. Let him feel it a little, that will wake him up. He's shamming death." Sebastiani took hold of the stick again and turned until the cord touched the swollen flesh. Dobrek gave a start. "That'll do, Sebastiani," said the Marquis. "Our friend seems favorably disposed and understands the need for coming to terms. That's so, Dobrek, is it not? You prefer to have done with it? And you're quite right." The two men were leaning over the sufferer, Sebastiani with his hand on the stick, D'Albufex holding the lamp so as to throw the light on Dobrek's face. His lips are moving. He's going to speak. "Loosen the rope a little, Sebastiani. I don't want our friend to be hurt." "No, tighten it. I believe our friend is hesitating. One turn more. Stop. That's done it. Oh, my dear Dobrek, if you can't speak plainer than that, it's no use." "What? What did you say?" Arsène Lupin muttered an oath. Dobrek was speaking, and he, Lupin, could not hear a word of what he said. In vain he pricked up his ears, suppressed the beating of his heart and the throbbing of his temples. Not a sound reached him. "Confound it," he thought. "I never expected this. What am I to do?" He was within an ace of covering Dobrek with his revolver and putting a bullet into him which would cut short any explanation, but he reflected that he himself would then be none the wiser, and that it was better to trust to events in the hope of making the most of them. Meanwhile the confession continued beneath him, indistinctly, interrupted by silences and mingled with moans. D'Albufex clung to his prey. "Go on! Finish, can't you?" And he punctuated the sentences with exclamations of approval. "Good! Capital! Oh, how funny! And no one suspected? Not even Praville? What an ass! Loosen a bit, Sebastiani. Don't you see that our friend is out of breath? Keep calm, Dobrek. Don't tire yourself. And so, my dear fellow, you were saying that was the last." There was a long whispering to which D'Albufex listened without further interruption, and of which Arsène Lupin could not catch the least syllable. Then the Marquis drew himself up and exclaimed joyfully, "That's it! Thank you, Dobrek, and believe me, I shall never forget what you have just done. If ever you're in need, you have only to knock at my door, and there will always be a crust of bread for you in the kitchen, and a glass of water from the filter. Sebastiani, look after Monsieur le Député as if he were one of your sons, and, first of all, release him from his bonds. It's a heartless thing to trust one's fellow man like that, like a chicken on the spit." "Shall we give him something to drink?" suggested the huntsman. "Yes, that's it, give him a drink." Sebastiani and his sons undid the leather straps, rubbed the bruised wrists, dressed them with an ointment, and bandaged them. Then Dobrek swallowed a few drops of brandy. "Feeling better?" said the Marquis. "Pooh, it's nothing much. In a few hours it won't show, and you'll be able to boast of having been tortured, as in the good old days of the Inquisition. You lucky dog." He took out his watch. "Enough said. Sebastiani, let your sons watch him in turns. You, take me to the station for the last train." "Then are we to leave him like that, Monsieur le Marquis? Free to move as he pleases?" "Why not?" "You don't imagine that we are going to keep him here to the day of his death? No, Dobrek, sleep quietly. I shall go to your place tomorrow afternoon, and if the document is where you told me, a telegram shall be sent off at once, and you shall be set free. You haven't told me a lie, I suppose?" He went back to Dobrek and, stooping over him again, "No humbug, eh? That would be very silly of you. I should lose a day, that's all, whereas you would lose all the days that remain to you to live. But no, the hiding place is too good. A fellow doesn't invent a thing like that for fun. Come on, Sebastiani, you shall have the telegram tomorrow. And suppose they don't let you into the house, Monsieur le Marquis. Why shouldn't they? The house in the Square Lamartine is occupied by Praville's men. "Don't worry, Sebastiani. I shall get in. If they don't open the door, there's always the window. And if the window won't open, I shall arrange with one of Praville's men. It's a question of money, that's all. And, thank goodness, I shan't be short of that henceforth. Good night, Dobrek." He went out, accompanied by Sebastiani, and the heavy door closed after them. Lupin at once effected his retreat, in accordance with a plan which he had worked out during this scene. The plan was simple enough: to scramble by means of his rope to the bottom of the cliff, take his friends with him, jump into the motor car, and attack d'Albufex and Sebastiani on the deserted road that leads to Aumale station. There could be no doubt about the issue of the contest. With d'Albufex and Sebastiani prisoners, it would be an easy matter to make one of them speak. D'Albufex had shown him how to set about it, and Clarisse Mergy would be inflexible where it was a question of saving her son. He took the rope with which he had provided himself and groped about to find a jagged piece of rock round which to pass it, so as to leave 2 equal lengths hanging by which he could let himself down. But when he found what he wanted, instead of acting swiftly, for the business was urgent, he stood motionless, thinking. His scheme failed to satisfy him at the last moment. "It's absurd what I'm proposing," he said to himself. "Absurd and illogical. How can I tell that d'Albufex and Sebastiani will not escape me? How can I even tell that, once they are in my power, they will speak? No, I shall stay. There are better things to try, much better things. It's not those two I must be at, but Dobrek. He's done for. He has not a kick left in him. If he has told the Marquis his secret, there is no reason why he shouldn't tell it to Clarisse and me when we employ the same methods. That's settled. We'll kidnap the Dobrek bird." And he continued, "Besides, what do I risk? If the scheme miscarries, Clarisse and I will rush off to Paris, and, together with Praville, organize a careful watch in the Square Lamartine to prevent d'Albufex from benefiting by Dobrek's revelations. The great thing is for Praville to be warned of the danger. He shall be." The church clock in a neighboring village struck 12. That gave Lupin 6 or 7 hours to put his new plan into execution. He set to work forthwith. When moving away from the embrasure which had the window at the bottom of it, he had come upon a clump of small shrubs in one of the hollows of the cliff. He cut away a dozen of these with his knife, and whittled them all down to the same size. Then he cut off 2 equal lengths from his rope. These were the uprights of the ladder. He fastened the 12 little sticks between the uprights, and thus contrived a rope ladder about 6 yards long. When he returned to this post, there was only one of the 3 sons beside Dobrek's bed in the torture chamber. He was smoking his pipe by the lamp. Dobrek was asleep. "Hang it," thought Lupin. "Is the fellow going to sit there all night? In that case, there's nothing for me to do but to slip off." The idea that d'Albufex was in possession of the secret vexed him mightily. The interview at which he had assisted had left the clear impression in his mind that the Marquis was working on his own, and that in securing the list, he intended not only to escape Dobrek's activity, but also to gain Dobrek's power and build up his fortune anew by the identical means which Dobrek had employed. That would have meant, for Lupin, a fresh battle to wage against a fresh enemy. The rapid march of events did not allow of the contemplation of such a possibility. He must at all costs spike the Marquis d'Albufex, guns by warning Praville. However, Lupin remained held back by the stubborn hope of some incident that would give him the opportunity of acting. The clock struck 12:30. It struck 1. The waiting became terrible, all the more so as an icy mist rose from the valley, and Lupin felt the cold penetrate to his very marrow. He heard the trot of a horse in the distance. Sebastiani returning from the station, he thought, but the son who was watching in the torture chamber, having finished his packet of tobacco, opened the door and asked his brothers if they had a pipeful for him. They made some reply, and he went out to go to the lodge, and Lupin was astounded. No sooner was the door closed than Dobrek, who had been so sound asleep, sat up on his couch, listened, put one foot to the ground, followed by the other, and standing up, tottering a little but firmer on his legs than one would have expected, tried his strength. "Well," said Lupin, "the beggar doesn't take long recovering. He can very well help in his own escape. There's just one point that ruffles me. Will he allow himself to be convinced? Will he consent to go with me? Will he not think that this miraculous assistance which comes to him straight from heaven is a trap laid by the Marquis?" But suddenly Lupin remembered the letter which he had made Daubrecq's old cousins write. The letter of recommendation, so to speak, which the elder of the two sisters Rousselot had signed with her Christian name Euphrasie. It was in his pocket. He took it and listened. Not a sound, except the faint noise of Daubrecq's footsteps on the flagstones. Lupin considered that the moment had come. He thrust his arm through the bars and threw the letter in. Daubrecq seemed thunderstruck. The letter had fluttered through the room and lay on the floor, at 3 steps from him. Where did it come from? He raised his head toward the window and tried to pierce the darkness that hid all the upper part of the room from his eyes. Then he looked at the envelope, without yet daring to touch it, as though he dreaded a snare. Then, suddenly, after a glance at the door, he stooped briskly, seized the envelope, and opened it. "Ah," he said with a sigh of delight, when he saw the signature. He read the letter half aloud. "Rely implicitly on the bearer of this note. He has succeeded in discovering the Marquis' secret with the money which we gave him, and has contrived a plan of escape. Everything is prepared for your flight. Euphrasie Rousselot." He read the letter again, repeated, "Euphrasie, Euphrasie," and raised his head once more. Lupin whispered, "It will take me 2 or 3 hours to file through one of the bars. Are Sebastiani and his sons coming back?" "Yes, they are sure to," replied Daubrecq in the same low voice. "But I expect they will leave me to myself." "But they sleep next door?" "Yes." "Won't they hear?" "No, the door is too thick." "Very well. In that case it will soon be done. I have a rope ladder. Will you be able to climb up alone, without my assistance?" "I think so." "I'll try. It's my wrists that they've broken." "Oh, the brutes! I can hardly move my hands, and I have very little strength left. But I'll try all the same. Needs must." He stopped, listened, and, with his finger to his mouth, whispered, "Hush!" When Sebastiani and his sons entered the room, Daubrecq, who had hidden the letter and lain down on his bed, pretended to wake with a start. The huntsman brought him a bottle of wine, a glass, and some food. "How goes it, Monsieur le Député?" he cried. "Well, perhaps we did squeeze a little hard. It's very painful, that thumb-screwing. Seems they often did it at the time of the Great Revolution and Bonaparte, in the days of the chauffeurs. A pretty invention. Nice and clean. No bloodshed. And it didn't last long either. In 20 minutes you came out with the missing word." Sebastiani burst out laughing. "By the way, Monsieur le Député, my congratulations. A capital hiding place. Who would ever suspect it? You see, what put us off, Monsieur le Marquis and me, was that name of Marie which you let out at first. You weren't telling a lie, but there you are, you know. The word was only half finished. We had to know the rest. Say what you like. It's amusing. Just think on your study table." "Upon my word! What a joke!" The huntsman rose and walked up and down the room, rubbing his hands. "Monsieur le Marquis is jolly well pleased. So pleased, in fact, that he himself is coming tomorrow evening to let you out. Yes, he has thought it over. There will be a few formalities. You may have to sign a check or two, stump up, what, and make good Monsieur le Marquis expense and trouble. But what's that to you? A trifle. Not to mention that, from now on, there will be no more chains, no more straps round your wrists. In short, you will be treated like a king. And I've even been told, look here, to allow you a good bottle of old wine and a flask of brandy." Sebastiani let fly a few more jests, then took the lamp, made a last examination of the room, and said to his sons, Let's leave him to sleep. You also take a rest, all three of you. But sleep with one eye open. One never can tell." They withdrew. Lupin waited a little longer and asked, in a low voice, "Can I begin?" "Yes, but be careful. It's not impossible that they may go on a round in an hour or two." Lupin set to work. He had a very powerful file, and the iron of the bars, rusted and gnawed away by time, was, in places, almost reduced to dust. Twice Lupin stopped to listen, with ears pricked up. But it was only the patter of a rat over the rubbish in the upper story, or the flight of some night bird, and he continued his task, encouraged by Daubrecq, who stood by the door, ready to warn him at the least alarm. "Oof," he said, giving a last stroke of the file. "I'm glad that's over, for, on my word, I've been a bit cramped in this cursed tunnel, to say nothing of the cold." He bore with all his strength upon the bar, which he had sawn from below, and succeeded in forcing it down sufficiently for a man's body to slip between the two remaining bars. Next he had to go back to the end of the embrasure, the wider part, where he had left the rope ladder. After fixing it to the bars, he called Daubrecq. "Psst! It's all right. Are you ready?" "Yes. Coming. One more second, while I listen." "All right. They're asleep. Give me the ladder." Lupin lowered it and asked, "Must I come down?" "No, I feel a little weak, but I shall manage." Indeed, he reached the window of the embrasure pretty quickly, and crept along the passage in the wake of his rescuer. The open air, however, seemed to make him giddy. Also, to give himself strength, he had drunk half the bottle of wine, and he had a fainting fit that kept him lying on the stones of the embrasure for half an hour. Lupin, losing patience, was fastening him to one end of the rope, of which the other end was knotted round the bars, and was preparing to let him down like a bale of goods, when Daubrecq woke up, in better condition. "That's over," he said. "I feel fit now. Will it take long?" "Pretty long. We are 150 yards up." "How was it that d'Albufex did not foresee that it was possible to escape this way?" "The cliff is perpendicular." "And you were able to—" "Well, your cousins insisted. And then one has to live, you know, and they were free with their money." "The dear good souls," said Daubrecq. "Where are they?" "Down below in a boat." "Is there a river, then?" "Yes, but we won't talk, if you don't mind." "It's dangerous. One word more. Had you been there long when you threw me the letter?" "No, no. A quarter of an hour or so. I'll tell you all about it. Meanwhile, we must hurry." Lupin went first, after recommending Daubrecq to hold tight to the rope and to come down backward. He would give him a hand at the difficult places. It took them over 40 minutes to reach the platform of the ledge formed by the cliff, and Lupin had several times to help his companion, whose wrists, still bruised from the torture, had lost all their strength and suppleness. Over and over again he groaned, "Oh, the swine! They've done for me! The swine! Ah, d'Albufex, I'll make you pay dear for this." "SSH," said Lupin. "What's the matter?" "A noise. Up above, standing motionless on the platform, they listened." Lupin thought of the Sire de Tancarville and the sentry who had killed him with a shot from his harquebus. He shivered, feeling all the anguish of the silence and the darkness. "No," he said, "I was mistaken. Besides, it's absurd. They can't hit us here. Who would hit us? No one. No one. It was a silly notion." He groped about till he found the uprights of the ladder. Then he said, "There. Here's the ladder. It is fixed in the bed of the river. A friend of mine is looking after it, as well as your cousins." He whistled. "Here I am," he said in a low voice. "Hold the ladder fast." And, to Daubrecq, "I'll go first." Daubrecq objected. "Perhaps it would be better for me to go down first." "Why?" "I am very tired. You can tie your rope round my waist and hold me. Otherwise there is a danger that I might—" "Yes, you are right," said Lupin. "Come nearer." Daubrecq came nearer and knelt down on the rock. Lupin fastened the rope to him, and then, stooping over, grasped one of the uprights in both hands to keep the ladder from shaking. "Off you go," he said. At the same moment, he felt a violent pain in the shoulder. "Blast it!" he said, sinking to the ground. Dobreck had stabbed him with a knife below the nape of the neck, a little to the right. "You blackguard! You blackguard!" He half saw Dobreck in the dark, ridding himself of his rope, and heard him whisper, "You're a bit of a fool, you know. You bring me a letter from my Rousselot cousins, in which I recognize the writing of the elder Adelaide, but which that sly puss of an Adelaide, suspecting something and meaning to put me on my guard, if necessary, took care to sign with the name of the younger sister, Euphrasie Rousselot. You see, I tumbled to it. So, with a little reflection, you are Master Arsène Lupin, are you not? Clarisse's protector, Gilbert's savior. Poor Lupin, I fear you're in a bad way. I don't use the knife often, but when I do, I use it with a vengeance." He bent over the wounded man and felt in his pockets. "Give me your revolver, can't you? You see, your friends will know at once that it is not their governor, and they will try to secure me, and, as I have not much strength left, a bullet or two. Goodbye, Lupin. We shall meet in the next world, eh? Book me a nice flat with all the latest conveniences. Goodbye, Lupin, and my best thanks, for really I don't know what I should have done without you. By Jove, d'Albufex was hitting me hard. It'll be a joke to meet the beggar again." Dobreck had completed his preparations. He whistled once more. A reply came from the boat. "Here I am," he said. With a last effort, Lupin put out his arm to stop him, but his hand touched nothing but space. He tried to call out, to warn his accomplices. His voice choked in his throat. He felt a terrible numbness creep over his whole being. His temples buzzed. Suddenly shouts below, then a shot, then another, followed by a triumphant chuckle, and a woman's wail and moans, and, soon after, 2 more shots. Lupin thought of Clarisse, wounded, dead perhaps, of Dobreck, fleeing victoriously, of d'Albufex, of the crystal stopper, which one or other of the 2 adversaries would recover unresisted. Then a sudden vision showed him the Sire de Tancarville falling with the woman he loved. Then he murmured, time after time, "Clarisse. Clarisse. Gilbert." A great silence overcame him, an infinite peace entered into him, and, without the least revolt, he received the impression that his exhausted body, with nothing now to hold it back, was rolling to the very edge of the rock toward the abyss.